This is John Jackson Miller, writer of Star Wars comics and novels, and you're listening to Star Wars with Stevie B. May the Force be with you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? I got Xezene here with me today, and this gentleman was brought to my attention by Marcel Ryan. I'm not on Reddit or Twitter or any of the Discord. I'm on Discord, but not on it much. But this person creates these amazing infographics, and then through talking, he's a whole bunch of contributions, like years and effort put in, interviews and little clips from authors about the books through different time eras. It was just an insane amount of information, and also a YouTube channel, HoloNet, where there's a documentary that was put up that was remastered, some Star Wars Underground footage that I've never been aware of. So I'm very excited, and I'm very happy that you're here to join me today, sir. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. I'm glad to be here. Thanks.
Yeah. So what? Real quick, what's the weather like by you? Just curious.
It's snowy. Very
Yeah.
snowy.
Yes. Okay. It was like that here today, and it was very gloomy, and it was like sleeting, and now all of a sudden the sun's out, and it's like it's incredible, and the water it's all melting really fast. It's nuts. But it's just nice to see the sun. I was pretty excited.
Yes, and it's supposed to warm up in the next couple of days, which I'm looking forward to because I'll be a bit on the road, so I want it to be nice.
Perfect. So yeah, I'm really interested, after we were talking a little bit there through Discord, it's like, how did you get involved with wanting to put so much, like you did a tremendous amount of work that we'll get to, and it's so impressive. And I'm still like going through it like, wow, I can't believe this is out there. But what made you decide to do this?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, it's funny how these things start, right? Like a lot of things in life, there's one thing that sort of starts the ball rolling, and then once the ball is rolling, and there's a momentum there. So I think the very first, if I think about what was the very first thing, and I feel comfortable saying this now, I waited a little bit to see, make sure that things were fine. And I'm sure Lucasfilm was aware of it, but this channel that I made, HoloNet, I put out this test footage, which I had found, the Underworld test footage that George had wanted to be made to shop the show around back in 2010 when they were trying to get it off the ground. And I had found it, and I was blown away by the fact that this existed. And so I put it out there, and I found this fantastic document that had been made, this amazing Google Docs thing, which is linked in the description of that video. And it was an amazing thing that this person had put so much time into documenting all the ins and outs and history of the Underworld TV show, which was canceled. And I was very impressed. So I linked it in there. And then I remember in the comments afterwards, people say, well, you have any more? And I thought, well, I don't think so. But then, as the months kind of rolled on, and I thought, well, I should use this channel. I'll be really frank with you. I actually expected the channel to be shut down immediately because of this footage, but I was surprised to see that it stayed on.
Right. Yeah, me too. Just from what I'm like, wow, continue. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. And so because it was around, I figured, well, I'll put out this Legacy Reveal documentary. I always loved it. And then the year kind of went on, and separate from the channel, I had seen there, I guess this is really what got the ball rolling. I had seen so many misconceptions over the years about the creation of the new Jedi Order book series, especially George's involvement with what happens to Anakin and Anakin Solo. And so I decided, well, you know what? I'm just going to do this one thing. It's like a one-off. I'll write this making of. I'll do this background piece, which will go through the series, how it was made. And I just wrote this thing. It wasn't an infographic, just a text. And after that, I was kind of a bit more involved with the Discord and stuff. And so one thing sort of led to another, where we do that. COVID was here. Yeah. There was a lot of time. And my work shut down over COVID, although I was still employed with them. And so I'm at home, very little to do. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be great to have this Vector Prime commercial remastered? And of course, the first thing you think is, well, I hope someone else has done it. And then you see no one else has done it. And so right. You think, well, I guess I'll have to do it. And so that's really, if you really want to know, that was the very beginning, is thinking, well, if this stuff doesn't exist, then then I suppose I have to make it exist because Lucasfilm doesn't seem to be interested in doing these things, which I really think they should be doing. And then I really, once the infographics got rolling around, that was also just thinking, well, there's all these, I'd find all these little things and just think, it'd be really great to have people know about this.
Yeah.
And Tales of the Jedi was the one that really got those going with George.
Interesting. Yeah. Here, I'm going to put this into the stream here. We can show some of the folks here. Like, this is one of your infographics that you were mentioning.
Yes.
And it's just like, you're right. Like, when I was shown these, I was just like enticed by it. I'm like, I can't believe this. There's a lot of good information here. Like you were saying.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, and I think so too. And I realized I had written this making of thing for NJO, and although it was great, I just remember thinking, I have a little background in journalism and some graphic design stuff, and I just thought the best way in our modern age to have people actually see this stuff is to have it be in a picture that looks nice.
Yeah, and it just grabbed your attention. I believe this is one of the promos from Heir to the Empire.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, actually. You mentioned this because, so this was in black and white. I found this way back when it was in black and white it was from one of the Lucasfilm fan clubs. This was before Star Wars Insider. This is B91 or so.
Wow.
92. And I found it in black and white, and I just thought, when you print something in black and white in a magazine, it was in color, right? But it gets downgraded to black and white. And so I remember thinking there's got to be posters of this in color, but I could never find any. So I put it together and I recreated it in color.
Yeah, it's great job. Like because I like promo stuff too, like especially like bookmarkers. That's kind of like my thing now is if I go somewhere, I try to get a special bookmarker, but yeah, it's just really neat. And then you were talking about the new Jedi Order, which I know there's a lot of people in the fandom that absolutely love that series. I have yet to get there on my journey. I'm excited to, but like, here's another piece right here.
Yeah. And this one is actually part of an ongoing thing that I haven't released everything from yet. So I guess I could talk a little bit about it. So,
perfect.
This is the Vector Prime promo poster. And, this was in magazines, but it was also out and about as posters. And I remember thinking, when I saw this, I thought, there's got to be promotional material for this series that we just haven't seen. And I came across this little thing. A lot of this is just by digging a little bit. I think it was Publishers Weekly said, for Balance Point, I think that's the 5th or 6th book. It's the second hardcover in the series. And but Balance Point, Kathy Tyers, this book, it's got a publication of 250,000 copies, which is actually really good first run. And then it was saying, that there's promos in major magazines. I remember thinking, I have never seen promos of Balance Point. This is crazy. And so I went on this little quest to try to see if I could track down some of these magazines for really cheap on eBay, see if I could find some of this, not in Insider, but other sci-fi stuff. And I actually did find quite a few of those ads. I need to scan them and then get them on the internet. But there's some, like the Balance Point one, I don't think has ever been on the internet. I've never seen a picture of it anywhere, but I have it, and so it'll join this one. And there's one for the Unifying Force. There's a whole bunch, basically most of the series. Yeah,
that's awesome. And I'm sure fans are going to be super excited to see that. And it's crazy, if you do some digging, trying to find some information, and then you don't come across it. But then now you're going through magazines and other sorts of media that, other books, like back in them days, they would have things in the back of the books, ads, even when you bought action figures or toys, the same thing, they would give you little pieces of stuff. So it's just crazy that it's finally starting to come to light, and it's a good thing.
It's totally true. I agree. And I think with stuff like this, the goal is to try to get it in as high resolution as possible for those promos, because then I'm thinking, if someone wants to print it, which we can do these days, you can custom print posters or t-shirts, whatever you want to do, you can do.
Yeah. And that's awesome. And then, it shows the support. It gets, other fans and people aware of, hey, what's that? Like you were talking about Tales of the Jedi, it will roll into this, here's George and his, ideas and thoughts behind that. And, the art from this series is just incredible as well.
Yeah. And Tales of the Jedi is an interesting piece of Lucasfilm history because well, I was going to say unfortunately, but there's a new show with that name.
Yes.
But the fact is, Tales of the Jedi. This is really the one that started all the George infographics getting going, because I was just discovering so much material from Kevin here and Tom and all these artists who worked on it, that there was quite an extensive process which involved George on this, where he's reviewing the art, he's reviewing the concepts, he's answering questions, he's giving his input, and he's interested. And I mean, eventually he did give this out as a Christmas gift for that year. And I think, I can't know for sure, I don't know him, but I think that he probably really liked this series from what it sounds like, because by the time they're working on KOTOR and Knights of the Old Republic later on, even at that time, the developers of that are saying, George likes this time period, he's interested in it. So I think, yeah, it was very interesting, and this is what got it going.
Yeah, and I was turned on to this as well, because I had no idea about the comic book thing. I'm just getting into that. I'm just currently reading Dark Empire, which is phenomenal. Another Tom Veitch project there. But like Tales of the Jedi was it's insane. It's so good. And I don't know why, like you were mentioning, Dave Filoni and the Tales of the Jedi and all that. Now, I don't know, it would have been nice to see some of this kind of, but that's a whole different conversation probably.
Yeah, I was hoping, but
yeah,
we didn't get it. But what you said about Dark Empire, that I don't know if you wanted to talk about that later, or if you want to talk about it now, but Dark Empire is really that's a huge surprising part of this behind the scenes journey I've been on. It's one of the biggest things I came across, actually.
Yeah, we can, we'll finish up these little, and then we'll get into it, because I just finished Dark Empire part 2, we'll say, this morning.
Oh yeah,
so
sure.
Yeah, and here, you got actors, that they know about the books, and it's cool.
That really was to be honest with you, that was 100% of the motivation for this one. It was just going, hey, I think this is really neat. That they like this. It was really to show that at the time that Lucasfilm was a privately held company under George and everything, I think it's harder for people today to remember, but maybe we might remember, and other people might remember, that at that time it was all really just Star Wars. I mean, there wasn't online. You might have had some of the arguments about canonicity, but it was just one big Star Wars spectacle and universe. And so the actors were sometimes reading it, sometimes involved in it. And it was one big cool party.
Yeah. And it's great. You're right. Like George probably took care of his people. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
oh yeah.
It was like a like, we're in this together. We all signed up. Now we're a family, until this project is done,
Yeah.
And that's cool. And that's probably something that does not happen today, I would assume, for the most part. That's just an assumption.
Yeah. And I don't know, but you're right about that. George is very nice to people who worked in the company. And there are great things in this little collage of infographics. One of my favorite ones was coming across. The Ian ones and the Peter ones were great, and then Carrie's response there is very funny.
Oh, I laughed so hard, and I'm like, yeah, I could see her saying that.
Oh yeah, that's how you know that she probably did say that.
Perfect. Yeah.
I mean, seeing Ian there with actually holding Plagueis is just kind of mind blowing,
Yeah.
But later on in some of these infographics, I thought it was so cool to see some of the newer generation, like the voice actors from the Clone Wars TV show, and how much they loved the rest of the EU. So you had people like Sam Witwer, and you had I forget her name but the actress who played Padme, and she really wanted to play Jaina, which I just thought was fantastic.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting. That would have been something. I can't think of her name too. She's in the Marvel movies now.
It's Catherine Tabor, I think.
Yeah. Okay. And then here's another one with Jedi Academy trilogy, another popular, Kevin J. Anderson. Yeah,
I really liked putting this one together, to be honest with you, because it's just full of great stories. The little note that George gave to Tom there, look to Buddha. It's definitely a George thing that he would say.
Yeah.
And then you have Kevin down here. It's just great, him talking about this funny little exchange where he's going back and forth with licensing. about, whether spice is a drug. And of course, finally, they just can't get an answer. And so they go to George, and Kevin's like, yeah, go ahead and ask George. And then George goes, yeah, of course it's a drug. I always thought that was so funny. And you have a little snippet here. It was in the third section where you get just a little implication. I was very fascinated to find this, that, Kevin was one of those people that, because he lived so close to Lucasfilm, he would go down to the Skywalker Ranch and talk with George. And he would actually, of all the EU authors, he probably had the most contact in the 90s with George and the rest of those guys. And so Kevin's down there and he's involved in this. And you have little things here, like at the last second, he's given this recommendation. And I could never nail down if it was straight from George, but it seemed to imply that it really was, because it was him talking with George in the context of that, that this suggestion that there should be these force sensing paddles. And to me, at least, that's like a midichlorian test right there. I mean, George is working on the prequels at that time. So
yeah. That's awesome. It's funny how little things you can pull from something and how much of an impact it made later on.
Right.
It's like, well, we never would have expected that. But so yeah, that's just some of the stuff, folks, that gentleman put together here. And he just recently, I'll link it later in the description as well, like a Reddit post with all of his work. Simple, quick, it's very user friendly, and there's a lot of stuff there, especially I was listening to, because I really enjoyed the book Rogue Planet, so the Greg Bear little snippet was good. It was cool to see that, because unfortunately we've been losing some authors lately. Michael Reeves just passed away, so another great author.
It kind of kills me, because I really wish, I'm a person that's done the best with what I can, but Lucasfilm, if they had wanted to, could do documentaries with these people, and I wish they would.
Oh, yeah, they should. I've been saying that for a little while now. It's like, there's stories to be told here, and even if it's not a part of their canon now or what have you and all that debacle, it's everybody would watch it. I guarantee it.
There is an untold history of the EU, which unfortunately people like J.W. Rinzler, who would have been perfect to cover it, is no longer alive. I had a very, very brief opportunity to contact him about his future books, and unfortunately, he died, but before he could even try to address some of those things. But to be honest with you, it was really tragic in his last months at Lucasfilm. He was really trying to get the ball rolling on this, archival book on Indiana Jones, and he had written the making of The Force Awakens, and that had been shut down by the powers that be. And he basically was told, and this is after the sale, that Lucasfilm was just not interested in this archival material, which just kills me, because they have so much.
Yeah, it's like, oh my goodness sakes. I could do. That's a show that you can binge for sure, because there'd be so much of it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So, before we jump into it a little further, let's get a little bit of your backstory of how you became a fan and so enticed with Star Wars and such. Like, what's that first memory?
Oh wow, it's one of those things where Star Wars has been with me sort of before I can remember. So I think in my family, I know I must have seen the special editions in theater, but I was so young that I'm not sure I remember that. But I certainly remember the promotions around the Phantom Menace, which I just remember wandering into a Pizza Hut and seeing them sell the Queen's. It was like one of those toys you could get at the Queen's Starship. And I just remember thinking, this is amazing, because I was a little kid fan of the Star Wars saga. And then the fact that we're getting prequels, it was like your favorite thing is getting a second dose. And that was just so cool. So I grew up with the first three, but I was very young. And then the fourth one was added, which is episode 1. And I really loved the prequels growing up. I really did. And I devoured all the material. I remember reading, I had a little guide and reading this thing and going, George says that Obi-Wan and Anakin had a fight. This is released in the 90s, had a fight and Vader fell into the lava. And that's why, and I remember thinking, Oh man, I wonder how they figure that out. I wonder if that's going to be true. And then, of course, sitting in the theater, Revenge of the Sith, going, "Wow, it really is true." I mean,
Yeah.
and in terms of the EU, that's something where, you know, I really started out with the Jude Watson novels, which I loved, Jedi Apprentice and things like that, which I have to tell you, I mean, New Jedi Order is my favorite, but Jedi Apprentice is right there. I mean, I really love that series.
Oh my goodness sakes. Yeah. I read it a while back and I just couldn't put it down.
You know, it's funny, they're kids' novels, but not, they have the heft of something much older.
Yes. I've said that. I
Yeah,
mean, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say characters like Xanatos and this whole really complicated story with Obi-Wan. It's interesting.
Yeah. And especially how Xanatos, you know, passes, you know, is kind of brutal.
Yes,
You know?
some dark stuff that happens in there.
I said that. I don't know if you've read any of the newer stuff or any really, we'll probably say now, any newer young adult books or kids books, you know, like they're very soft spoken, we'll say, you know, there's nothing wrong with them. But like the Jedi Apprentice, like, yeah, I said that. That's like, these feel like adult novels almost. I mean, there's some emotional parts in there for myself, I can remember.
Oh yeah, that and Jedi Quest, and I especially loved the Jedi Apprentice special edition where they went multiple eras. I think the Boba books, which would not by Jude Watson, but the Boba books, that's the most invested I think I ever was in Boba, because it was him dealing with his father's death and him wanting to have revenge on Mace Windu and all these things. It was very interesting. So I was into that. I had actually tried to check out some Star Trek, but I really couldn't get into those novels. I was too young. And so then I remember reading some of the Bantam, I think, checking out from the library, things like Splinter of the Mind's Eye and Truce at Bakura, a lot of those early novels, and of course the Thrawn trilogy. I'm not sure when exactly I was a regular reader, but there was a point at which I was just banging them out and reading the next one in the line. And because I went chronologically, that did mean I missed some. But I remember reading Black Fleet Crisis and the Corellian trilogy and even Crystal Star, but I don't actually remember much of the events of that novel. But I do remember reading some of those. I think The New Rebellion was a favorite of mine before the New Jedi Order. I think the New Jedi Order, when that came, I read it a bit after it was released, but so I was probably reading it, you know, between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. And I remember starting to read it and just thinking, nobody knew how long this was going to be. And so I remember just reading it and going, well, you know, this is a tough enemy, but, you know, we always come out of these and we win, you know, so there's no, and then of course this enemy just will not go away and things are getting harder. And that's especially by Star, I'm really sitting there going, how are they going to do this? I mean, that really had me gripped. I think the last thing I'll say in the lead up to Revenge of the Sith was that I was watching the micro series, which I loved. And then I was reading Labyrinth of Evil, super anticipated. I mean, one of the biggest reveals of Labyrinth of Evil was just seeing what Anakin looked like in Revenge of the Sith. And I remember reading all that and then sitting in the theater, Revenge of the Sith, with everyone. My whole school went, and some of us dressed up. I have to confess I did too.
Right.
And so I'm there, and we're all watching this. And I remember there's that line where Obi-Wan and Anakin are talking. Well, firstly, I should say before that, you have Grievous coughing. And I thought, whoa, we just saw him get his chest crushed by Mace Windu in the show. And then this next thing, you have Obi-Wan and Anakin talking, debating about who's going to talk with the politicians. And they mentioned this thing on Cata Nemoidia. That blew my mind in the theater going, I just read that a couple of months ago. You know, so I loved all that. Yeah.
Yeah, I can just imagine. And probably, you know, some of your friends are, you know, you were probably talking about it and they were probably looking at you like, well, I didn't read that. You know what I mean? Where are you getting this information from, buddy?
You know, it's actually funny. I knew somebody who was much more of a hardcore fan than I was. And so his family went and they were in the tents. And I was so jealous. I remember the days, you know, the day that the movie would come out, I'd be like, that would be the longest school day ever. Because I know he's already seen it.
Yeah. So, you know, you grew up with the prequels. I enjoyed the prequels. I was kind of in the middle ground. I was older when the prequels came out, so a little older. And I enjoyed them a lot too. You know, I never had any issues with them. I thought they were fun. I thought it was exciting, especially with the way that the film industry was going now with the technology and what George was trying to do. You know, it was great. So is there any favorite moments that like really stick out to you from the prequels?
In the prequel films?
Yeah.
Let me think. I mean, that's really hard to say because there's stuff about them that I notice every time. I think there's moments of beauty that catch me off guard. I would say as a fan, some of the moments that a lot of people like, I like.
Well, yeah.
When I first sat in the theater, I was blown away when they did that zoom out in the Senate, and you see Yoda and Obi and Palpatine like started going, and then you think, and then he cuts away, and you go, "Oh my gosh, we're gonna have a fight in the Senate building? This is crazy." I remember thinking that in the theater. But as an adult, I would say my favorite. I like some of the more emotional scenes. So I like, when Obi-Wan has to tell Padme what has happened to Anakin. I think that's a really real and powerful scene. And the music's extraordinary. And I think the scene in Attack of the Clones where Anakin is going to dinner with his family and he's told about Shmi, and you see Padme's response to that. And then we have this kind of wordless scene. We see their shadows, and then we see, the Duel of the Fates as he's zooming across to save his mom. I mean, it's all very mythical, timeless stuff to me right there. And moments like that for me are just as strong in the originals.
Oh yeah. And like you were saying earlier about reading the books and how it added to the film when you saw it. Like going on this journey, and like I just read Attack of the Clones novelization. Now I'm on Wild Space, a Clone Wars novel, but like just in the book, the relationship between Padme and Anakin and how it's growing, like I'm excited to watch the film again and notice more of the moments that you're talking about. Yes,
and it's one of the things, if you've ever been interested in the behind the scenes of the films, George, if you go through, there's these movies start out much longer and then they have to cut. And the last scenes that George would ever cut from episode 2 and 3 were always the scenes with Padme, because he'd be so reluctant to cut those scenes. And of course he had to eventually for the length of the film, for pacing. But there are some scenes from episode 2 which I just think are awesome, with Padme's family, where Anakin's, and those are in the novel, where Anakin comes over to Padme's house and meets her, and you could see her interest in him, and she talks a little bit about her history, her difficulties,
her background.
Some of this was added. I mean, I did read Jude Watson's Journal of the Queen from episode 1.
Okay.
And that was interesting because that's inside Padme's head. So that did get me kind of invested in that character. But I think, I hear you. I mean, sometimes the books really add, and
big impact.
I will say on the prequels, unfortunately, I mean, when I was older, I think I was swept up in what had happened on the internet, where there was a period of time after the release of the Clone Wars film and after the release of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, George's reputation was kind of in the tank. And of course, I never really disliked him, but I remember at that time, the anti-prequel sentiment was extremely strong, and in every place online. And so I think partially, those Red Letter Media reviews came out, and I think for a while I was also kind of swept up in that. I never hated them, but I moved away from that, and I think that was the time period where my Star Wars fandom was probably at its lowest ebb. I never disliked the movies, but it wasn't until a couple years later, through the music, I was listening to John Williams' music again, and that caused me to go back and rewatch the films, and sitting and watching them, I was like, hey, I really love these movies.
Yeah, it's funny how when you take a break from it and you come back to it, the impact. It's not like you said you didn't dislike them, and even like you were saying, like it's funny through times how the media influences everyone, right? You didn't have a problem with it initially, then all the online stuff was happening that was becoming a thing, and then the negative critics and so on, and then you kind of follow the trend. But it's just it's funny how that happens throughout the fandom. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and it's funny when I've done these little trips into the past. It's amazing that you'll find this kind of thing happening in the 90s in the Bantam era. You're finding you go onto these old like dusty message boards, and you have people saying in 1995 that George is ruining the saga and that these books are terrible and
They're trash.
It's so
Burn
funny.
them.
You have a lot of people going, these don't count. They never counted. And none of this stuff. George doesn't see any of this. And then you have other people going, George reads every word.
Yeah.
You know, and it's very funny to see all this. I was actually very amused to see that. I don't know exactly when. This must have been 1999-ish. But there was a group, I guess, at the time that was of really negative people who were very critical of the Phantom Menace, and they were being called the Fandom Menace
Yeah,
in
I've heard that term.
1999.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because I'm not very familiar with this term now, but people today have used that to refer to sequel critics. So I find it funny, history just kind of replaying itself.
Yes. Yeah, 99 was a big year. I mean, we had Woodstock 99. That was a whole other program happening there. Oh my goodness sakes.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I said, I've always been, a fan of the movies and collecting toys, but so the whole EU and then, like you said, the Phantom Menace, I've heard that term, I wasn't a part of that, nor was I a part of the Disney purchase. I heard about it. I didn't think nothing of it. Obviously Disney, I mean, it's Disney. They got money and they can do a lot of things, right? I was like, okay, cool. We're going to start having more movies. Hopefully. That was my initial thought. So I wasn't a part of that Phantom Menace. Wasn't a part of the 2014 whole situation, but now I can see why fans were hurt in a sense reading these books, and then folks saying, okay, this just no longer exists, because the books are really good and they add a lot, like we were saying. But I'm a fan of the new stuff as well. You know what I'm saying? But I just kind of run them parallel, which is fine. So I mean, you mentioned that the night. What was your thoughts behind the Disney purchase?
I remember where I was. I was at my university's library reading online the news, and I sort of was in disbelief. I hadn't been following Star Wars for some time at the time.
Right.
I think the only thing I was really thinking of at the time was that they had announced Sword of the Jedi, the trilogy, and that had attracted my attention. So I remember thinking, I wonder what will happen with that, which of course it was canceled. But I remember reading it and just being surprised, because in the headline or in the byline, they would say, well, George sold Lucasfilm to Disney, which I found surprising. And then it said episode 7's on the way. I remember thinking, I can't tell you the number of interviews I've seen with George, even at that young age. How many interviews where George has said, there's no episode 7. I've never written an episode 7. There's no. And so seeing this was just funny. It was like, really? But I think my initial response was, well, let's see what they do.
Yeah.
And I was open to see what would happen.
Yeah. I mean, did you enjoy the films at all? Or are you not?
The Force Awakens, yeah. I enjoyed it the first time I saw it, the first couple of times. I think it was the third viewing where, I don't want to say I put on the Star Wars goggles, but I watched it with the way I would watch the rest of the movies. The shine had worn off.
Yeah.
So I started to think, how does this connect to the universe? What's it about? What are we trying to say here? What are the themes? And that was when I was very dissatisfied with the movie. So then my opinion kind of declined. I don't hate the movie, but it declined. Rogue One, I do have some issues with the story of Rogue One, but I think it's probably the most enjoyable of the films they've done. It was the space battle at the end was really, really cool.
Yeah, so. It was good. Yes.
The Last Jedi, I did not care for The Last Jedi. I was really, I was very sad at the end of that. I felt very sad because I felt that, and I understand people have different reactions to the film. Some people love it. But in fact, my favorite Star Wars author, Matthew Stover, seems to really love that movie, which I respect that opinion. But for me, I was very sad because it felt a lot of the things that I love in Star Wars, the mythic sweep, the archetypes and the themes and all this stuff, I felt it was all gone. But somehow there was something in The Last Jedi that made me feel like it was not going to return. So I really felt because of that feeling, I didn't see Solo. And Rise of Skywalker, I did see. I'm going to be honest with you. I was kind of entertained by the Rise of Skywalker because I the story is kind of crazy, but at this point, because I enjoy the Star Trek universe, I had been used to J.J. Abrams, his influence over these things because he had done those films. So seeing Into Darkness, there were times that J.J. did what I thought he was going to do, and then there was other times where he surprised me, but and we'll just say surprised me in extra J.J. ways that I couldn't have imagined. And so it was kind of like, I remember the scene where the lightning goes and lightnings all the ships. I remember thinking, wow, that's straight out of a comic book. This is crazy. So on some level, I enjoyed it. There's a lot of EU stuff in that movie. Yeah. But on another level, I'll be honest, I never really took it seriously as a Star Wars film because I think The Last Jedi for me was where the line was drawn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that and your thoughts behind it. Because, I've probably seen them films 3 times each, to be honest with you. I was in and out of the fandom and didn't think nothing of it. When I watched them, they were good. It's like, okay, a Star Wars movie, but like I would never revert to going to them to watch one, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
I
did like the first half of Force Awakens, and I felt that there was something potential there, but it just didn't materialize.
Yeah, Rogue One is good. It's got moments, Chirrut is a very interesting character to me. The Wills, that whole backstory, obviously the ship battle and Vader at the end. I really enjoyed Solo out of all them. I thought it was just fun, just felt like a classic, fun Star Wars tale, if you will.
I have yet to see it, and it's been recommended to me, so maybe I will check it out.
Well, yeah, there you go. Stevie B says, go ahead. Yeah, it's fun. I think you might enjoy it. Like you said, just keeping it is what it is. I have yet to read any of the Han Solo trilogy books from the expanded universe. I'm excited to because Han's obviously a cool cat. So yeah, I haven't watched them very much. The original trilogy is where I go to all the time if I want to watch a Star Wars film. But the Phantom Menace holds a special place in my heart. It's my favorite.
I was going to ask if you had a favorite of the films.
Yeah, the Phantom Menace is for the prequels is my go-to, my favorite. But it's A New Hope is my overall favorite. Now, as like we were talking, you mentioned earlier, as you grow older, you look at things differently. Okay, so Return of the Jedi was always my favorite because Luke ignites that lightsaber. He's all dressed in black. I just thought he looked so cool and slick.
Yeah.
I wanted all my clothes to be black. But A New Hope, now that I'm older, it's like the perfect story from start to finish in a sense.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And I was able to see it on the big screen last year, and I was in heaven. So
I can imagine.
Return of the Jedi is probably, I love all of the 6, but Return of the Jedi, as a kid, it was my favorite. And then I went through a period of time where I was going, now Empire. I love Empire. But then I think I've come back around to Return of the Jedi. It's one of those things where, it's hard to compete with a movie where you just are good at the end.
Yeah.
Just, everything is good. And it's just great. It's a great fairy tale.
It is. And, I put it on at nighttime, to kind of fall asleep. I fall asleep to it pretty quick after I put my book down. But my wife, she'll wake up and she'll be like, how many times are we going to watch A New Hope at night? And it's like, well, hon, it's good, So A New Hope is my favorite, and it's you were mentioning some of the scenes, with Padme and Anakin, Leia and Han, their relationship, as you get older, it's like you look at that different, and it's just great.
Yeah, and actually, I really love what the EU did with their relationship as the years went on. It was just, and I think that was one of the things for those of us that were into the EU, that when the sequel films came out and you saw how their relationship had disintegrated, it was one of those things that just hurt an extra little bit because we had seen this couple go through so much in the novels and make it through it all. and then in the films, the first film, they have been separated.
Yeah, it's weird. It was weird. I've read like the Courtship of Princess Leia. Dave Overton loved it. I've read that. I was kind of reading out of place here and there, but now I'm just following the timeline. So, I mean, that was great, and obviously in the Heir to the Empire trilogy, and they got kids. They actually got 3 kids, they got 2 twins, Jason and Jaina. And, a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah. And that gets to one of the infographics I made was great, was finding Carrie Fisher talk about that and having Mark Hamill talk about his son in the EU, Luke's son.
Yeah.
And that's just, it was so neat to see that they're aware of it. Of course, people ask me later, what did Harrison say? I don't think Harrison knows, but no.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny when people, ask. It's Harrison Ford. You know what I mean? He's gonna be Han Solo and Indiana Jones forever. You know what I'm saying?
He's so Han Solo, he doesn't even like the character. That's how Han Solo he is.
Just touching off subject, but we'll touch on the Dark Empire. I just finished part 2, we'll say. And she had Anakin, and Han's like, well, we're going to name him Han Solo Jr. And, and she just kind of looks at him in the comic. It's just so perfectly done. And she's like, no, it's going to be Anakin. It's perfect.
Yeah, no, it really is. And that's the reason, by the way, if you don't know this, just to show another thing about Harrison as Han. In the films, the reason Ben Solo is named Ben, that name is not taken from the novels. That name is taken from the fact that Harrison's son is named Ben.
Yeah.
So they just went from, Han's kid is Harrison's kid, I guess. But, I will say about all that, talking about the original films, I love the Leia and Han thing, but Luke, the character of Luke and his, I think it's unique, especially in the history of movies like this and stories like this, to see a heroic, kind of a warrior character. I mean, he has a lightsaber.
Yeah.
A heroic character that becomes, he goes in a path which is counter to what his teachers really want him to do, a more compassionate path. And he doesn't defeat the Empire or Vader by lightsaber. He defeats them with wisdom and compassion. I mean,
yes.
Some of the stuff in the second film, Empire Strikes Back, the Eastern things like from Zen and from Taoism, that got me really interested in those subjects when I was in high school, and it's carries right on through. I mean, a lot of the new Jedi Order is influenced by that philosophy, and that's one of those things that I wish was still in the new material, which I haven't sensed.
Yeah, you bring that up because on your channel there you have that documentary which brings up the legacy in a sense, and it talks a lot about the influences, from mythology and religion and philosophy. I like that. I really enjoy Bruce Lee's philosophy. I've read a lot of that. I like that. But it's it's interesting, how, like you were saying, you're right. Luke he's the greatest story. There you mentioned compassion and as well. Like Empire Strikes Back, when he's on Dagobah and they're telling him, don't go, you're not ready yet. He's like, no, these are my friends. I'm going. That's how I would be. That's how anybody would be.
Yeah, sure.
You know what I'm saying? Well, a good person,
It's a weakness of his in that film, but it's a strength in the next film.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's the thing, I've sometimes said that the 2 characters don't get enough attention in the EU are Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen, because they clearly raised Luke well enough for him to understand that, connections matter.
Yeah. So, I mean, I really enjoy like your idea, I've always liked mythology too, in school. It always intrigued me, the gods, the Greeks, that whole era and things, so it's just cool to see that through history and through time, these things are retold, but just differently. Yes.
And honestly, this is one of those things that, I'm a fan of Star Wars, but I'm a fan of George Lucas as an artist. I love his first film, THX 1138, and I've always liked it a great deal. And then, American Graffiti, but he also produced a lot of things. I'm making my way through the Young Indiana Jones show here. He's an interesting guy. He was a race car driver who gets in this accident, and then he's into anthropology and social science, and philosophy, and then he's a filmmaker. So if you look at the Star Wars films, actually all the movies he did, if you just think, what would a race car driver, gone anthropologist, gone movie maker, what would he make?
Yeah.
This is what he makes. And I think that's why people don't always recognize that Star Wars, it is a franchise, but Star Wars is, the films at least, are the personal stamp from this guy. And they're doing a franchise now it's gone off in its own direction. But, James Luceno was asked about this, and he said what I would say, which is that even though there was a franchise, it was George's films. And now there's a franchise because it's gone. It's outlived the person who created it, which means it's not going to have the same influence or the same spirit.
No, that's 100%. You just nailed it right there. I mean, James, you're right. And he was an artist and unique. And, to me, he probably, he was getting up there in age, he's still around and such and doing well, I'm sure. But, he was probably getting to that point, like, I got to take a break. Because from my understanding and from what I've seen or little things I've read about him, he was a driven person, and he was all, he had almost a heart attack at one point, he put a lot of weight on his shoulders is what I'm saying.
Absolutely. And I think, Star Wars was such a huge part of his life, but, the sale is a complicated issue. Part of it was, he wanted to get a streaming service up going. He wanted to have a Star Wars channel, which they would show Underworld. There were even plans that if Underworld was successful, they would have spin-off shows, Rebels, Empire, of live action. And he was even asked in Celebration 3 about the idea of doing a Knights of the Old Republic show, to which he said, we are thinking about that if Underworld works. Oh. But he had ideas, and he had ideas of his own of the Old Republic. I don't know if we'll discuss this, but he had very specific ideas about the new Sith Wars, which is the time between 2000 BBY and 1000, where the Sith basically ran the universe. And I was very surprised after looking into his comments to see that there are references littered all throughout the prequels to those events, which are not really told in the EU or anywhere. The EU hints at these things, but it never got around really to covering that. But anyway, he had ideas and he was excited about that project. But the fact of the matter is, he wanted to build this ranch, and Grady Ranch. And Kathleen Kennedy and John Favreau were discussing this a couple of years ago, and it's just true that he was not able to convince his neighbors to allow that to happen. Unfortunately, I guess his neighbors don't see eye to eye with him, but he couldn't make this studio next to Skywalker Ranch happen, which means he couldn't bring down the cost. And he had already decided he wanted the TV future to be Lucasfilm's future. He wanted their future to be TV. It's actually the reason Genndy Tartakovsky, who had done the micro series, Lucas wanted him to be the number one man.
Be a part of it.
Yeah, instead of Filoni, you would have Tartakovsky leading the future of Lucasfilm animation. And he was Lucas's first choice. And he wanted him to run everything. But Tartakovsky wanted to do other things. He wanted to do films. And George said, no, we're doing TV. So it's really the TV future, and that's why he chose Filoni. The TV future was what he thought, and that was all crumbling with the fact that he couldn't get the price down to have Grady Ranch there and to build all this stuff, which is really what the volume became. That's kind of what the volume is with it. They're doing that now. But that's what he wanted to do. And at the same time as that's happening, Bob Iger's in his ear saying, you're getting a bit older. He's in a relationship. He's been in a relationship for a couple of years. He's got married. He's got a kid. And, he has these other things, red tails. He worked so long to produce this movie, and then basically Hollywood turned its back on this movie. And so he was very bitter about that. So I think it was right at that time, and it was a time of negative public sentiment about George and the prequels, that I think he just felt that,
it's time.
Maybe it's time. I know that he was concerned that if he continued to pursue his dream of doing a museum, which he's doing now, and doing other things, that he was going to have to cut jobs from Lucasfilm. And it was one of his biggest motivations to sell was to protect those jobs. And it's unfortunate, the irony of it, that that they did actually get cut after the sale, but he didn't control that. He wanted initially to be an advisor, kind of like a J.R.R. Tolkien, but Disney wasn't interested in him performing that role, and I think that surprised him. There were like 2 times that deal pretty much fell apart, and but it finally came together at the end.
Yeah, they got it obviously all squared away. But yeah, that's amazing that they wouldn't want that. But then, maybe who knows? It sounds good, but maybe, he wouldn't have had all that control either. So that might have bothered him maybe at one point.
I think it definitely did. I mean, by the time he's seeing The Force Awakens come along, he's getting upset because they're not listening to him.
Yeah, and you mentioned the micro series here, which was great. I thought it was fun. It'd have been interesting to see if Tartakovsky could have, instead of Dave, in the direction they would have went. Or, I mean, even George had already foreseen that television was going to be the way to go, and that's kind of what's happening, right?
It's amazing how he's been sometimes ahead of the curve. There's a quote I found from the early 90s where he said he wanted to have games that were downloadable and streamable, that you could just play them. I mean, that's in the early 90s he's saying that.
Yeah. And I mean, look what he did with the prequels. He did some of the first things that were ever done in films.
Yeah, and the most miniatures probably that's ever been used for films. I mean, those films used miniatures in every set that you can imagine. And then, I mean, people have a tendency to think green screen, it's all CG, but the green screen is really for the miniatures. And so that's, it's amazing. I mean, there was a huge pushback when he tried to change the industry to go digital, and now everybody does.
Yeah, that's the age we're in. I don't think we'll ever be back to the big screen like we were ever.
Yeah, and there's arguments to make for things like film and to move in other directions, but George always saw it as, I want the movie screen to be able to capture my imagination. And if your imagination is really big, I mean, sometimes you think about, it's easy now, we look back and look at Yoda, for instance. This is a character that everybody loves. But if you think about how crazy that kind of is, I mean, you're saying we've got the biggest movie. We want the sequel to have a Muppet, a little puppet.
Yeah.
And to think that that's going to work in a way that no one has been able to do it. And George just says, well, I think we'll be able to do it, so do it.
Yeah, and they did it. I felt bad for the gentleman underneath the stage because oh my goodness, to be hunched over like that all day, boy, I'll tell you what.
And that really shows Mark's acting ability.
Yeah,
to be able to act off a puppet. And I mean, you're getting lines from under the stage, and that he's directing it towards Yoda.
Yeah, it's crazy, And I mean, you got to connect with it. I mean, as an actor, you got to have, and it, you buy it. You do.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, it's amazing, and that's, I'm sure it's one of the things we'll discuss, is that George, with the EU, he was very helpful at many times of promoting a very creative atmosphere. So there are times that George vetoed things, but there are almost always times where he's saying, be more creative. And we could actually, we can talk a little bit about that with NJO.
Yep.
NJO is probably the most significant contribution George had to the EU after the films. And it's amazing, the Yushin Vong would not exist if George is not involved in that process. The story would not exist as it does if George wasn't involved there. I mean, it's very fascinating to me, the role that he played. And he played a huge role due really to Dark Empire. Dark Empire is what caused him to take on this role, which everybody really only found out about that this last year. It's a pretty recent surprise discovery.
Yeah, well, I mean, with the release of all the new Epic collections and things, because to be honest with you, as a collector, and trying to find some of this material and comic books and even some of the books, it's tough.
It's pricey.
It's pricey. Yeah, boy, I'll tell you what. I say it's like Christmas every time the mail, I open up the mailbox and I got something in there, and the wife doesn't like that, but she gets it,
Yeah, no, I get that. And I, if you don't mind, I think it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about
please.
Dark Empire. So, Dark Empire, just take a little drink here. Dark Empire is really an interesting one. I mean, that's a situation where that comic book was in development for really like 3 years. So, I mean, if you look at where Star Wars is when Tom Veach gets the idea, or maybe we should say where he got the audacity to send a letter to George. I mean, at that time, it's late 1987, 1988. So it's around 88 that he's thinking about doing this. At that time, there's really no Star Wars comics that are being printed. The ones that are being printed by Marvel are not covering the cost of printing them. That's from Cam Kennedy, who did the art on Dark Empire. They just weren't even covering the cost. The books are not really doing anything. There's nothing happening. There was a little bit of movement trying to get James Luceno and Brian Daley to do something, but that really fizzled out at Del Rey.
Okay.
And so there's really nothing happening in the world of Star Wars. And what's happening is Lucy Wilson, who I would say Lucy Wilson is perhaps the most important person in the history of the EU. We could talk a little bit about her too, but she is this person, Lucy Autrey Wilson, who she types up the first script, A New Hope. I mean, she's George's first employee. And she does all these amazing things. She manages to finance. She cashes the first check for A New Hope. She's there from the start. She knows all the actors. And then she's the one who, in the 80s, she says, I'm getting kind of bored doing this financial stuff. I've always wanted to do creative things. Could I move over to the licensing department? And George okayed it because he was friends with her. But George kind of said to her, I shouldn't say this. George didn't say this to her, but the chief financial officer, whoever that was, said to her, Lucy, if this doesn't work out, you're out of a job. So, I mean, wow, So she's there, and they're doing licensed tie-ins for, like, the Grateful Dead, like the band. They're doing, Lucasfilm was doing all these little side things,
That's Grateful Dead. I mean, that's...
I know. And what's happening is Lucy's going around and she's shopping out all these things, but Lucasfilm they're not using any of their own properties. They're using other people's properties, just licensed fiction, really. And so that's where Lucasfilm was at in 1987, 1988. They're not doing anything of their own. And that's where Tom Veach sends this letter, which really is probably one of the most important letters. He sends it to George, and Lucy gives him a call on the phone saying, hey, we got your letter. We're interested, but we got to check with George. And a couple of days later, George says, yeah, okay. After he takes a look at the Light and Darkness War, which they did, he and Cam Kennedy had done this comic. George loves comic books. He's just always a huge fan of comic books. He used to read the Star Wars comics, the EU ones. He read the Thrawn trilogy.
Wow.
So he loves these comic books. But George okays it. So because of that, this ball gets rolling. Veach gets into this process where he's talking with Lucy. And there has been this misconception for years that, sort of George was guiding this process. But George really wasn't, because there wasn't an EU. This is a one-off comic book. It's initially supposed to be 3 issues. It's with Marvel. And so Lucy's talking with him. And there's a very detailed breakdown of this in the Star Wars Insider that they did. Is great retrospective where they go through, and Veach is suggesting some ideas that they don't end up doing, ideas that are pretty far out there. I mean, ideas like Palpatine in the films was just a shell, and there was a parasite that was controlling him, and the parasite survived, and now it's got a new host body in Dark Empire. That's an idea that's rejected. Another idea that's rejected is this whole idea that there's a android body that's a Palpatine, and that is a droid. And so you have this whole thing of all these ideas that get suggested, and the one that gets chosen is the clone. All right, we'll do a clone. He'll be a clone. So this process goes through, and what happens at that point is Marvel loses Archie Goodwin, who is leading this, and he had done the early Marvel comics. He was the one that was interested. He's the editor who's interested in doing this project. And the other editors are not that interested in doing it. They stopped paying Cam Kennedy. Cam Kennedy can't get work. He's not working on the comic. Only the first issue is done. deadlines are coming up, supposed to release in like 1990, 3 issues, and Tom Veitch is starting to panic. He sends Lucy this letter. He's saying, hey, here's some other artists who could work on it. We got to get this comic. And Lucy, she loves Cam Kennedy's art. And she's like, we are not letting this guy go. So right at that time, Cam has some friends over at Dark Horse. People like Mark Richardson and Randy Stradley. And they go, well, we love Cam's art. Why don't we do Dark Empire? And so they meet to talk with Lucy about this. And while they're talking, I think the suggestion comes up, why don't we run Star Wars? Why don't we make a new deal with Lucasfilm? Let's just drop Marvel. Why don't we have a new deal with Dark Horse? And Lucy goes, absolutely, let's go for it. And she asks George, and they say, sure. And so that's off to the races. We do that. And so Lucy gets that done. And at the same time as Lucy's doing that, she's talking with other authors. And one of the authors, some other project, not Star Wars, one of the other authors goes, I would love to write a Star Wars book. And Lucy just kind of takes that idea and go, interesting. And then she goes back to their offices, and she's kind of curious. So she's rummaging through these letters and finds this letter from Lou Aronica at Bantam. And Lou Aronica at Bantam, it's so funny. So he had really staked it. He's the editor at Bantam, and he's really staked his reputation on this. They all think he's crazy, but he's like, no, we should do Star Wars. They're like, Star Wars? No one cares about Star Wars. And he's like, no, there is an industry for Star Wars. And his job's on the line if this doesn't work out. But he sends this letter. Lucy reads it, and she's like, absolutely, we've got to do Star Wars. What are we doing this license stuff for? So she asked George and Howard Rothman. They say yes. So she signs that deal. And then she starts thinking, who do we want? And she chooses Timothy Zahn. And she chooses. So she's doing all this. She sets up everything. Well, here's where this gets interesting with Dark Empire is the comic releases. It gets done. 6 issue. They expanded it for Dark Horse. It's a very successful one of the most successful runs in comic book history at that time. I mean, Marvel was making like peanuts at the time, and suddenly this just explodes onto the marketplace. Huge success. And Lucy tells us an amazing story. She's walking down the hall, and George comes up to her, and George goes, Lucy. And she's like, what? And he goes, I would never have cloned the Emperor. Where are you getting this? And Lucy goes, what do you mean? And he says, I would never have done that. And Lucy says, well, maybe we would know that if you would work with us on some of these things. And so George is like, okay. So send me outlines. So that's where this all starts. All his EU contribution starts because after that, Lucy starts sending him outlines because of Dark Empire. Now, I should say, George did love the art of Dark Empire. He bought the covers for his personal collection. He bought the set as a Christmas gift. He gave away to Lucasfilm employees. So he liked the art, and he was willing to work with Tom again for Tales of the Jedi, but he wasn't a fan of the clone thing. I mean, they asked Lucy years later, how do you think that George would have reacted to Rise of Skywalker? Yeah. And she said, he would have been rolling his eyes. He would have hated it.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the art. I mean, you touched on a lot of things there. I mean, it's crazy to think Lucy just was shooting from the hip here and making things happen, and that's incredible. And where we are. I mean, I have it right here, like, there
it is.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying. The art, I've been I do kind of like a book blog, of my journey a little bit, and I recorded one today because I finished part 2 this morning. And it, like I mentioned, the art, it's just, to me, like it, I mean this with all respect, but it's like a grunge, like a garage band art to it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense,
Perfect for 1991.
Beautiful. And I'm kicking myself because there was a gentleman around my area on a marketplace that was selling the complete set of the Dark Empire, like collectible tin card. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's like a special thing.
Yeah.
Of Dark Empire. He had like all the cards, and they were like, I don't know, it's cool, but I didn't mean to trail off there.
No, that's awesome. I mean, I get you.
It's just the art and how there's moments in here where they zoom in on the eyes. Like there's like if Luke says something or Leia, that's very intense, it'll be like there'll be a shot of like the eyes. And I just think that is so cool.
George loves stuff like that too. I mean, that's something that he had an art book that collected his favorite comic art, and it was a panel just like that from Crimson Empire, and I think maybe even Thrawn trilogy that he took from just of that kind of like Sergio Leone. We zoom in on the eyes, good, bad, the ugly kind of thing, where he just loves all that. And he even did that a little bit in Revenge of the Sith, where Obi-Wan fights Grievous. He had this little zoom in of the eyes. You know, he loved it.
Yeah, it was, and to think, you know, some of these things I didn't know about George. I mean, I know he's very creative, he's very artistic. I get that, but like you mentioned, the comic book side of things, and it's cool to think that that's what started it all. Like, I had no idea. You always hear so many different, like you said, when they were saying about the buyout and Seven. No, I didn't have nothing written. I don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
It's, you know, you hear so many things. Well, he never had any contributions, or he did a little bit, but like to think that's what got it rolling, that's so cool.
Yeah, and it's really that relationship between Lucy and George, the friendship that they had and the working relationship. That's something that I think was probably the most helpful thing for the EU, because if we think about the things that George had a role, I mean, all these infographics I'm doing cover that.
Yeah.
But George, you know, he's there basically. He's providing guidelines, which are very important. I mean, people sometimes get it twisted because they think, well, did he write this story? Well, no, he didn't. But that wasn't the point of this. George wanted other people to write the story, but he still wanted to participate, to give guidelines of what you do, what you don't do. So, for instance, you know, Timothy Zahn wanted Joris C'baoth, or C'baoth, I guess that's how Zahn says it.
Yeah.
Wanted that character to be a clone of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and wanted the Nogri to be the Sith. And, you know, that was struck down. And that was something where Bantam, even though Dark Empire, that was a process that didn't come to George. Bantam, that licensing deal came later. So they did go to George right from the start at Bantam. And they asked him, you know, they said, hey, can Han and Leia have kids? Sure. Can they do this? No. You know, can you know, and there's the illustrated Star Wars universe. That's one of the ones that I did an infographic on that really surprised me, because that was one where Kevin is working with Ralph McQuarrie, who, by the way, Ralph McQuarrie loved Dark Empire. So you got Ralph McQuarrie, who's the original artist of Star Wars.
Yeah.
And you have George there. And George really cared about this project. And he's there talking with Kevin. He's telling Kevin things he would never expect. He's saying things like, yeah, that looks like Alderaan. Yeah, you know, this is what's happening at the Coruscant underbelly. Yeah. You know, Yoda's not from Dagobah. He's just visiting, you know, and stuff like this. I mean, it's great. And that's actually where we have the first recorded time where George accepts the Timothy Zahn contribution, where he goes, yeah, it's called Coruscant. That's how we're going to be pronouncing it.
And that's how it started.
Yep. And it's amazing to think, you know, there are times that George would just borrow straight from the EU. Timothy Zahn talks about this time where in the Thrawn trilogy, you catch the lightning on the lightsaber blade. And of course, we see that in Attack of the Clones.
Yeah.
And Timothy's convinced it's because George read the comics. And we pretty much know that he did read the comics of Thrawn trilogy. So, because he included it in his own collection. So I think it's one of those things where his contributions were consistent, but they're important. I mean, if you look at the NJO outline, that's what started this whole journey for me. I was so fascinated because that's a situation where Lucy Wilson is on the phone with George talking about this outline. They have another meeting to discuss the ins and outs. I mean, these things are going from James Luceno and Michael Stackpole and Lucy Wilson, Shelley Shapiro, Sue Rustini, and they go straight to George. George is looking over. And the first outline was very different. I mean, the first outline, you have essentially Sith or Sith-light enemies who have been watching the galaxy for a long time. They see the Jedi start to rise and they want to quash it. And so what happens is Anakin Solo, this prophesied chosen one, might sound familiar. He's a prophesied chosen one. He falls in love, but then he gets corrupted to go to the dark side. And in that exchange, Anakin kills, Jason is killed. And that was an outline that when it came to George, he rejected it. That was the original NJO outline. He said, no, this is too similar to the prequels that I'm working on. And the Sith could never form a society like this that would actually work because they'd all kill each other. And so he's giving these outlines, and essentially he put it all under one big headline. He's writing these little notes in like May '98 or something. He writes these notes, and it's all under one big line: be more original. We want something more creative, more original. Don't do it like the films. We want something very different. And that's where they get together. And Lucino goes, well, what if we have an alien that's kind of like the Aztec or the ancient Mayans? Like they're this really different, like Aztec kind of. And they go, well, Yushin Vong. And that's how they create this really different thing. And then they make this path. That's the other thing George says is, don't do this Anakin thing with the chosen one and prophecies and falling in love and dark side. I don't want you to do that story. Why don't you do a different story and make Jason the hero? And so then they go, okay, let's do that. And they work all that out in '98, but that's a huge contribution. I mean, it's actually interesting because if we put that in context, he didn't like the sequel outlines because he didn't like what they did with those films. So that's a future that George didn't care for. But then if we look at the outline that was rejected for a New Jedi Order, that's actually, there are some things there that are very similar to what they did do in the EU with Legacy of the Force. And so if we look at it that way, really the NJO is sort of the one that we got, the NJO that we got is the only future that Lucas didn't write himself, that he was actually okay with them doing. That's sort of the one that got through the filter where he said, okay, this is close enough. I think what it tells me is that he didn't want the sequel trilogy or sequel era to be too similar to the prequels or the originals. He wanted to be something very different.
Yeah.
And I think NJO is different, but it's also the heart of it is the same. And for the Force philosophy from Matthew Stover and Walter John Williams, they went to George with that. And George said, yep, this philosophy of Vergier and this unifying Force thing, that got George's stamp of approval, which blew my mind when I found out that. But that's amazing, yeah.
Yeah, that's just incredible to think of all that. I know a little bit about it, and how they're not force sensitive and they're, staring from a galaxy far away. And, I really like that. And just to think that George was like, yeah, let's do this. And the outlines were brought to his attention. And, you hear so much from other people of, their thoughts. Oh, man, you got me really excited to want to read this now. But being honest with you.
It is my favorite. I feel that it took Star Wars as far as it could probably go. And the unifying force is a fantastic conclusion. I personally think that, Lucy Wilson said that when she worked on that series, Matthew Stover's Traitor, which is my favorite of the novels, you haven't read it yet, but it goes to a degree in terms of the prose and in terms of the ideas and in terms of the maturity that she was the most satisfied with it. And that sort of was her dream of what NJO could be. And Lucy, she stopped working in that department in 2003. But so at the end of NJO, she was done. But that comes the closest. And the fact that that book was her favorite, I think says a lot about the direction, because I don't know if you've read other Matthew Stover novels, but he's just such an incredible author.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, he is. I reached out to him, to be honest, to see, but because he's great. I really love Shatterpoint. I think it's, oh my goodness sakes,
it's amazing. And he, when George chose people to work on the novelizations, those are situations where George is meeting with them. So he wants to make sure that he wants to have the right people working. And so when he had the novelization, like you said, you read the Attack of the Clones. Yeah. That's a situation where R.A. Salvatore, Matthew Stover for Revenge of the Sith, he's given samples of these people's works and he reads them and he chooses the person. So that, that means that essentially George, he's reading snippets of Vector Prime or Traitor or Shatterpoint, and he's going, this is who I want.
I like that he wanted it to be like right away, be bold, be different, because I'll be like, through like the Bantam era, we'll say, okay, great authors, but it's all, I've always heard, and it seems that way, it's a similar story. Okay, there's a new ship, there's a new admiral, there's a new, somebody gets taken, but we get them back, which is good. It's great. All them novels, I can picture Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford. I'm in the action. I'm feeling it, so it's great. But now to go and do something, a story that has not been told, perfect.
Yes, and that was probably the biggest help that he was, to encourage the authors to really think outside and sometimes do accept things that people were surprised he would accept, like Tales of the Jedi, which everybody told Tom, George's never going to go for this. But
Oh,
then George really liked the idea. He said, absolutely, I like how different it is. Go for it.
yeah.
And so, the EU is sometimes this jumble of crazy, awesome stories. That's part of the fun of it, is George wanted these guys to spread and expand the universe. He wanted them to do things that maybe he wouldn't have come up with, but as long as they didn't contradict the tenets of his philosophy in Star Wars, he was happy with the contribution. It's very similar to how he worked on the films. He would be working on the scripts as the artists are making the designs, and sometimes he would see something and say, "Hey, I like that. All right, we're going to write that in."
Yeah.
So I mean, it's a very collaborative process. Unfortunately, there's this myth of George as he's kind of this, everybody's just yes man. He's just a dictator. That's really not at all the reality of the truth.
Yeah, I never couldn't see him being that way. Like I said, I mean, I know he was very passionate, with what you see. That's the vibe I get when I watch him on TV or when he talks about certain things,
Yeah.
So he's, like I said before, it just seems like he would take care of you.
Yeah. I mean, when R.A. Salvatore went in to do Attack of the Clones, they told him, you have about 30 minutes to talk with George. About 4 hours later, George is giving him a tour of the sets, and I mean, it's just great. I mean, it's
That's
awesome.
cool. Yeah, R.A. Salvatore, that he did a great job. Even Terry Brooks on the Phantom Menace, phenomenal job.
Oh yeah, and it's really neat how all that comes together. I mean, I'll just mention this here because it's something that I'm working on right now. So I'm working on the next couple infographics. One is on Shadows of the Empire, and the other one is on Hand of Thrawn. I'm going to try to get through all the way to the sale, but it's true. George's involvement dropped off while he was working on the prequel films. He wasn't involved in the storyline after NJL, so he didn't do Legacy of the Force or Fate of the Jedi. I didn't talk to him about those things, and he wasn't really involved with the Clone Wars multimedia project novels. He was doing other things, but Lucy, I should say, Lucy was no longer in that position. That was his point woman, I guess you could say, in terms of talking to about these things.
Okay.
But a lot of the video game people were still submitting him outlines to talk to Republic Commando, Bounty Hunter. They're talking to him about what they want to do. And but probably the one that might surprise people is that in 1994, I would say from 94 to 98, George is most involved in the novels. And in that time period, George, in 94, he's actually was one of the surprising things I discovered is he was involved in shaping Mara Jade's character. So, of course, you probably have heard this thing of George hated Mara.
Yeah.
It's true that George is not super fond of sort of what this character became. I think there was a photo shoot that was done in like 1999, and he didn't like how it came off. He thought it looked like a woman on the cover of CoverGirl or something. And so he didn't like the leather and the poofy hair, and but
bunch of moose.
Yeah, it wasn't really what he pictured. But in 1994, if we wind the clock back, he's there, and they asked George, they said, hey, Mara, she has the ability to communicate with the Emperor telepathically. Is that something only she can do? Or is that something that, and George has said, I think we should restrict that just to Mara. So we don't want that to, so that's something that only she can do. And that's actually the time, I should say, in early 1994, where they went to George and said, so we have this proposal, Hand of Thrawn. We want to marry Luke to Mara. What do you say, George? And he said yes.
Yeah.
So, George gave a little stamp at that point in time,
yeah.
94.
Yeah, I've always heard everyone, that's all, I never heard this before. So this is news to me.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. Okay.
Yeah,
because everybody's like, he didn't like her at all. It's like, oh, well, maybe, I don't know,
sometimes it's interesting with George to say, you ask people, or they ask you things about this where you say, well, did he like this or like that? And then sometimes you feel like saying, what year are you asking?
Yeah.
Because maybe if you, in 2010, maybe he didn't like her, but in 1994, it was a different story.
Yeah, and it's interesting. And you know, I didn't put up all the infographics that you have. Like we didn't go through some of them, so I'm glad. You know, I'll provide the link and everything because that all that information you've given us, I'm telling you, I appreciate it. I don't mean to jump off the subject here, but like
Yeah.
there's a lot, and it's a lot of cool, and you put a lot of work into this, and it's just awesome. And I'm thankful to have it, especially as a new EU fan, we'll say, coming into things.
Yeah.
It's just great, and I'm glad I have this at my fingertips to learn because I enjoy learning about the past and history, you know. And that documentary, you know, as well, like with mythology and religion and the philosophy aspects of things, you know, and it's making me look at things differently and in a good way, and being appreciative of that. So I just wanted to say thanks again for all that hard work you've been doing.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I feel the same way, and I think there's been huge surprises. Like when I found the Young Jedi Knights TV show that never was going to blew my socks off that they were thinking of doing that, but that would have changed things forever. But you know, this heart stuff, this stuff of the myth and the themes, and as you said, treating the history of the franchise kind of as a more serious thing. Um, I think there's something great about that, especially, you know, my interest, if I was really get down to it, one of the reasons I like NJO is because it deals with these heavy themes, and it tries to deal with the Force, and it deals with what Star Wars is really about. What does it mean to be a Jedi? What does it mean to do these things? And that documentary you brought up, it just covers those things. And
Yeah.
sometimes these behind the scenes things, it gets people thinking about it too.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You know, I was watching it, I was listening to it at work, and it's like, man, I want to watch this too, you know. So I was watching little bits of it here and there when you know I'm eating breakfast or what have you. And there's so much in there, and you know, Peter Jackson is in there, J.J. Abrams is in there. I mean, this is an older documentary, so it's just interesting to hear their takes on things too, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can tell you, I don't know how much about this I'll reveal, but there are two big projects that I'm working on that are larger than anything I've done before. And
Awesome.
both of them will debut on the HoloNet YouTube channel. One of them concerns itself a lot with kind of what I've been doing, the documentary type thing. And then the other one, I won't say too much about, but I think should be exciting for people, more interactive.
Oh, excellent. That's awesome. Little sneak peek here for
Yeah.
everyone. That's cool.
But yeah, you know, it's like I said, it's stuff I do in my spare time since I work and I do all the things other people do.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And you know, we were talking, you know, to jump back on, you know, Mara Jade, Luke gave the stamp of approval, you know, and you were mentioned Shadows of the Empire. You're working on that. I really loved that novel. I thought Steve Perry did a great job. It's fun. Like the characters, the video game, like it was a huge deal in its time.
It's amazing. You know, that was a huge project to just kind of go, let's do commercials and soundtracks, and let's do comic books and games and books. It's this amazing endeavor there.
Dash Rendar, who's that guy? You know,
that was something, you know, and there's been a lot of things said about it. But Outrider, which is the ship, of course, that Dash flies, that's something that was developed for that project. The ship, both that ship and a couple other ships, were designed by Doug Chang, who worked on the prequels. And what happened is ILM, when they were working on the prequels, they were trying to bring LucasArts and ILM together, have them work together. And so what happened is they said, you know, they're working on the special editions in '96, and they go over and they say, so let's go through your files and see what you got. Do you have anything good that we can use? And ILM asked that question, and what they get back from LucasArts is, well, we have some high render models that we've developed. We got an Imperial shuttle that we developed, but we also have this other ship that we just made up for this game called Outrider, but we did a really high res model of it. Do you want it? And ILM goes, well, sure. And so to this day, even in the new 4K version that's streaming on Disney Plus, if you look in the left-hand corner of the A New Hope scene where they're all there and Mos Eisley, see the ships taken off, the Outrider is taken off in the upper left-hand corner. It's great.
Perfect. That's perfect.
And that's straight from LucasArts. That's straight from
That-
Shadows of the Empire.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much, like you said, the soundtrack, the comic books, The New Hope. I mean, it's still very popular. Like,
Yeah, people love it. Yeah, I think a remaster would be extremely popular.
oh, 100%. You know, and I don't know. I mean, I know we didn't really touch on this, but are you currently reading anything? Are you still currently reading Star Wars here and there when you have time?
Yeah, sometimes I do. My interest in the Young Jedi Knights kind of got sparked by, and actually we could talk a little bit about this. It kind of got sparked by that TV show Discovery, which I never, ever would have expected to find that they were even considering this. I mean, I'll tell you the way it usually works in industry. So that's what I'm reading, Young Jedi Knights. The way it usually works in industry is you have Lucasfilm or some artists approach a company, a distribution or production company like Fox or any of these. Fox doesn't exist anymore, but you know, Disney, any of these other guys to say, hey, are you interested? Do you want to take this? Let's run with it. And that's what Lucasfilm tried to do with the Clone Wars and with Underworld. But the funny thing with Young Jedi Knights is, oh man, that was a totally different situation because you have Fox. So Fox, which they're the guys that you go to begging, and Fox comes to Lucasfilm and they say, hey, we want you to do, could you do a Young Jedi Knights show with us? That's just a layup. All you have to say is yes.
Yeah. Oh man.
I know. It's amazing.
That would have been mind blowing. You know, I'm working on my collection of getting them books. Friend Adam from Red 5 just hooked me up with two the paperback collection. So it's got 3 books in each one. So volume 1 and volume 2. Them books are hard to find. So I'm excited to read that because I've heard good things about that. But like this Underworld show, like I was watching it and it's like, this looks good, you know, and you could tell it's from that certain era, that certain time era, right? It's got that feel to it. But now to think that there would be a Fox and doing a Young Jedi Knights and they went to look, that's crazy.
If you think about that, really, it's amazing. I mean, you have the animated golden age. You've got Spider-Man and Batman and all these shows. I mean, it's amazing to think this, but Batman, the animated series, was distributed with Fox TV, Fox Kids. And at that time, it's just winding down. And I was trying to think, if this had happened, who would they have gotten to do it? And Paul Dini, who did Batman the Animated Series, had worked with Lucasfilm on Droids and Ewoks. And this is a bit of a speculation on my part, but I almost suspect that he would have been asked to do this show. And if that's the picture that we have, that possibly after Batman, we have the creators of Batman the Animated Series working on a Star Wars show, which is an animated show. I mean, that would have blown everyone's socks off. I mean, there would be no way that you could go forward without taking that into account. I mean, do the sequels even happen the way they happen if you have a popular 90s television show with the kids?
Right. But because then them stories have to be told.
And then people get nostalgic for that.
I mean, you know, and I mean, yeah, just think of that. And then if George, like you were mentioning, you know, he had the vision for the like television. Well, there, boom, you got a live action show. We'll say a sitcom. Boom, we got an animated series happening. You know, it would have just been rolling right down the chain.
At that time, Lucasfilm was a little scared to do so many things at once. They were working on the prequels. They were releasing special editions. They had licensing going, and they were afraid of juggling too many eggs at the same time. But George eventually, I don't know if I'm sure they asked him and he said no, but I don't know how much he ever thought about this, but he did come back to the idea when the very last project George was working on outside of Underworld. You know, Underworld was supposed to be part of a 3-tier thing. You got the kids show, Clone Wars. You have an adult show, Underworld, and you have 1313, which is the video game. But George wanted to spin off from the Clone Wars too, just like he wanted to spin off from Underworld. And so the last thing he was working on was the show called Padawans, which was going to be about young Jedi Knights in the Jedi Temple. And they're following their life, kind of like his version of Jedi Apprentice, I suppose.
That so cool.
That would have been interesting, right? I mean,
man,
to think about it, I think that they did an episode in the Clone Wars, and one of the characters was even a Wookiee Wookiee Jedi. So I mean,
Really?
just like
Yeah.
Lopaka. Yeah.
That's cool. Man, that would have been wild. That would have been wild for sure. For sure.
Yeah, that's, you could never say that Lucasfilm didn't have a lot of things going. They always had. And that's one reason I think it'd be great if they, it's up to us fans at this point, but if they ever got the interest to try to look into their own history, they did so many things that people, I think, would like to learn about.
Well, yeah. Well, yeah. Well, that's what I was going to ask you, before we went into this, which I'm glad we did. But like your thoughts on like them reprinting the expanding universe now, the Essential Legends collections, the comic epic collections. Like, I think that's a good thing. To try to,
I think it's great to increase the readership, obviously.
Yeah.
Anything that could do that is great because these are great works. But I do. I mean, I think it's great on the one hand, but on the other hand, I do. Just because I do these things, where I'm kind of looking in, I sometimes have the feeling that, surely we could add a forward, or surely we could add a little note from the author, or some behind the scenes things, like something to kind of say, hey, not only do you get the book, but you get kind of a special edition of the book where we cover, hey, like let's say we reprint Rogue Planet. Well, here's Greg Bear talking about the novel, and here's what it was like to publish it, and here did it cross George's desk and all this stuff, which, by the way, it did. Rogue Planet's one of those novels where the outline did go to George. George had a couple rules about it. He said, no Padme, don't deal with the droids. That's mine. You can't touch it.
That's my wheelhouse. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that would be great. I agree. I mean, I collect them. Some of the books, I'm still working on my collection, but some of the books, like I think, why haven't we seen Jedi Academy get, like Shadows of the Empire? Like these are some real staple. Not like, to me, Shadows should have been a film. Like it was that good.
Oh yeah, and I think that there is something in that always fascinated George. I mean, I agree with you about the Jedi Academy, why they haven't been reprinted, or Shadows of the Empire. It's a mystery to me. But when you look at Shadows of the Empire in particular, I mean, look at what George is interested in doing for Underworld, and what he's interested in doing, even for his treatments of the sequels, where you have the criminal underworld and Darth Maul's leading it and all this stuff. He was always fascinated by that crime side. And now they're dealing with the Pikes in Book of Boba Fett and all this stuff. The Pikes, that was invented for all this Underworld and everything.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned the book of Boba Fett. Do you stay up to date with the shows as best you can, or is there certain ones that you?
I watched the first 2 seasons of Mando. I saw Book of Boba Fett, and then I saw Kenobi. And I think at the end of Kenobi, I felt that I had seen enough. But I think in the case of Book of Boba, the Mandalorian episode, just the one-off, where he gets the ship and he's doing all this stuff out in this kind of halo type ring place, I thought that was an extraordinary episode. In fact, I think that's my favorite thing they've done since Rogue One.
Really? Yeah, it was great. That in the Book of Boba Fett, when you get the ship, and then Luke's in the next one, right?
Yeah. Just that one episode. I have to say, I was critical of the series, but I think that one standalone episode, it just felt like a great 40 minutes or whatever of television.
Yeah. Kenobi, I think, I'm going to be biased here because it's a nostalgic feeling, for Kenobi.
Yeah.
I'm sure you probably had the similar feel.
Yeah, he was my favorite character in the films and the prequels.
Yeah. I mean, I can't, Luke's my guy. Like, Luke's on a tier by himself.
Yeah, same.
Okay, right? But now that I've been reading a lot, and Obi-Wan's been involved a lot, I started, you start with the Jedi Apprentice series, you get that backstory, which is phenomenal, like we mentioned.
Yeah.
But so I've been reading a lot of Obi-Wan, and now, like, he's right there with me. He's on a shelf because he's just great too. Like I've said it a few times. He reminds me of Gandalf in a sense. He's gray and he's white. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I would say that Obi-Wan, He's a fascinating character because he's a character that was quite consciously designed to be a character that is ethically on the right side, and he's
Yes.
a good Jedi Knight. But he's one of those characters that we see that, in spite of his goodness, or sometimes even because of his goodness, mistakes are made. And so he's that character who, because it's set up in the original trilogy that he has these regrets about Anakin and everything that happened. We see that they're certainly not regrets of intent. I mean, he didn't mean to do some of the things or some of the issues he had with Anakin. But it's a fascinating portrait of a guy that's just a man of his era. Obi-Wan is a person of his time, and he's everything that the Jedi Order could ask him to be. But then we could also ask the question, is the Jedi Order always asking the right things of
Right.
people? And so Obi-Wan does everything right, but it's a tricky thing because he's that middle ground between Qui-Gon and the Council. He's that guy, and I've always been fascinated by that line in Phantom Menace. I'm sure if it's your favorite, you probably remember this, where he's arguing with Qui-Gon, and he goes, "If you would just follow the Jedi Code, you'd be on the Council."
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And I remember thinking, Qui-Gon doesn't follow the Jedi Code. Tell me more.
Yeah. We got to know. Well, right. At the time, you didn't know. We're seeing more Jedi now for the first time. Really?
Yeah. And Obi-Wan is that interesting character. I mean, if you look, it's so fascinating to me, his dynamic with Anakin. You see in the second film, Attack of the Clones, he's reprimanding Anakin. Don't be rash. Use your head. Learn to think. Take it easy. But this is a guy, his internal mindset is by the book from the Council. But he's trained by Qui-Gon. And so what does he do when there's a danger? He jumps out the window and grabs the thing and flies.
Yeah.
So I think for Anakin, it's got to be an incredibly confounding experience being this apprentice, because you're being told what to do, but what you're being shown to do,
it's two different things.
It's totally different. And that's because of who Qui-Gon was, but also Obi-Wan's time in the temple.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. And even in the books now too. I mean, you're right. He will nitpicking them and trying to show him and teach him. But in the book, sometimes it shows he's got that compassionate and he's questioning the attachment side of things, because that's always been a big question, if you will, the attachment. Does that play an issue? So it's interesting, but Obi-Wan, he's just great. And I just he's like top tier now as well. I mean, Qui-Gon, and Ewan McGregor as well. I mean, he nailed that character.
Ewan was really given an impossible task, and he pulled it off.
Oh yeah. Oh, 100%. And it's great. That's Obi-Wan too now. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I have always loved the first portion of Revenge of the Sith, where we see that Anakin and Obi-Wan have really become close. They really respect each other.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important for that movie to work.
Yeah, that's a good point. Very good point. And then the Kenobi series, I mean, it's got its issues now after I listen to and look at things a little differently. But I think, like I said, a bias, I just loved it just because we got Hayden back. We got Ewan McGregor back, and the fans embraced them, from some of the rubbish that they got criticized early on from the prequels, So it was just great. It was great to see that,
Yeah, and I can understand that. I loved seeing all the fan acceptance of, it's great seeing them sort of get appreciated or actually hear that. There's an infographic I haven't finished yet. I'd like to eventually get it out, but it's Gallup polling that was done.
Okay.
I can't believe it was actually done, but they did. Over the course of the summer of 1999, they actually polled people on how they felt about Phantom Menace in detail.
Really?
And what you find is that most people really did like it, as in the 80%, 90% category. But the truth is, time was pretty harsh once YouTube came on and you had a lot of critical reviewers.
Yeah.
But that came, and then it came to a halt with the sequels. And so now we see this reverse. It's been really a whiplash seeing, people go from liking the prequels, liking George, to not liking the prequels, not liking George, then back to liking, and
now not liking the sequels. And yeah, it's a whirlwind of emotions. Like we said, this could be a very big series, and it could break numbers, I think, because I mean, even non-fans would probably be interested to just hear the story behind George Lucas and Star Wars and Disney, or whatever you would name it, right?
Yeah, well, there's so many creative people, right?
Yeah.
You've got people like James Luceno, absolutely great that he was hired to do Star Wars. I mean, this guy, it's incredible. I mean, it's amazing, this guy's encyclopedic knowledge of these characters. And then you have people like Stover, Greg Keyes, and you have, Jude Watson, a lot of these really talented authors that were brought on. I mean, it's easy for sometimes people to look down their nose and say, this is tie-in fiction. But these are really good authors writing good stories.
Oh yeah, Jude Watson. You mentioned. I believe that's her pen name. Her real name is like Judy Blundell or Blendell or something.
Right, I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I never knew that because it's like when I was reading that, I was digging into it. I'm like, who is this author? This is good. She did all this scholastic stuff. Yeah, it's great. I mean, she did the Jedi Quest books too. Wow.
I can't believe her consistency. I mean, writing book after book for how many years on end?
And they came out.
They're all at that level of quality.
Yeah, like they're really great. And it's it's kind of it's unfortunate that some of these books, like we were saying, haven't been reprinted because they're really good, and to get kids reading again and, just offer them something. When I used to go to the bookstore or the Scholastic Book Club in school, the book fair, the art on them books like jumped out at you,
Yes.
It pulls you in.
Well, and maybe this is shooting for the stars here, and I understand it might be not what they're wanting, but I have always thought that novels like Jedi Apprentice or the Thrawn trilogy would be perfectly suited to an animated television series. I think that's just a layup waiting to happen, because the story, I mean, really, I can't tell you how many films I see or how many shows I see where you say everything's right, the production, the acting, everything's right, but the story's the prize. It's the cheapest part of the production, but it's the problem sometimes. It's the weakest part sometimes. But you look at these stories and the stories are solid. You're good. Yeah. You're just good from the start.
Yes.
So, I mean, I would build on that foundation. If you look at what Marvel has done, they have taken stories that they have done and they've run with it. And I think that something like that could be done with Star Wars if Lucasfilm desired.
Yeah, I agree. Part of me feels that they're just scared to pull the trigger on things, to take that chance, to be bold, to be creative, like George said with the, NJO and that whole meeting and team of players. I mean, big names, like you said, I think from what happened with the sequels, that just, to me, this is just my personal opinion, I just feel like they're scared to tackle something.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, George sometimes scared people at Lucasfilm. He was right. I mean, in fact, I'll tell you a funny story about this. George is working with John Williams on Duel of the Fates for Phantom Menace, 97, 98, 99. And they're working on this score. And George says, I want more choir. And so John adds a little bit. And then George says, no, I really want, I want you to do chanting. And we're really going to go all out here. And John, he's a little scared. He goes, and of course he's a genius in his own right, but he goes, think of what we've done. That's Star Wars. If we go in this choral chanty direction, if people even going to recognize that as Star Wars anymore? But George is like, no, it'll work. And so then they go there and boy, did it work.
Excuse me there. I was taking a drink. Sorry. You were right. That whole scene, when I think of the Phantom Menace and I think of somebody says Qui-Gon to me, okay, I immediately think of Duel of the Fates, going down the corridor, gets trapped, Maul's on the other side, Stitch is mean mugging him, giving him that look like I'm just going to wreck you. And what does Qui-Gon do? He gets down and meditates and closes his eyes. That is so powerful to me.
Yes.
It's like to have that evil, that just caged beast waiting to come at you, and just to be in tune with yourself and your environment and the force, the mystery, and just get down and meditate. It blows my mind.
It's awesome. I mean, and the way that it's visually presented, so direct and so clear. There's no missing it. I mean, this, you probably read that George has said, I made these movies for kids. I made
Yep.
these movies for kids.
Yep.
This is what he means. What he means is it's like a silent film, which he's always seen Star Wars as a silent movie because he loves the silent movies, is you have a score, you have the music, and you have the image. And just with the image and the music, you understand. And that's that scene.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that whole, even, you know, after his passing in the documentary, when I was listening to that work, I'll be honest, tell you the story. I was sitting there, you know, doing my job. I hear the Phantom Menace. You're talking about Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. They're mentioning this whole scene and the music. And then you hear Ewan McGregor scream after his master gets defeated by Maul. It like almost brought me to tears. I'm not kidding. You know,
it's powerful.
Yeah. You know, it's you connect with these characters on so much more than just the film, and you know, you're in touch with it, you know.
And you asked me earlier what it was like growing up with this, and what you said now just reminded me. I mean, when I was growing up, there were movies, there were television shows, and then there was Star Wars. Yeah. And it always felt like it was in a class on its own. Not just in quality, but just in kind. It was like this thing that existed in its own bubble. And I know as an adult what that is it was myth. It was a myth. It was like Homer's Odyssey or something, or Gilgamesh or something like. It was something that lasts forever because of the stories are archetypes. The characters are these mythic archetypes that they represent themes. They represent ideas. You see Qui-Gon and Darth Maul in that scene, and Darth Maul represents something, and Qui-Gon represents. They're not just characters. They carry something with them. And I think that, I will say, connecting this a bit to our where we are now, sequel-wise, I think that's perhaps one of the reasons, maybe even the main reason for the reaction to The Last Jedi that happened, is because Luke, in conventional storytelling, characters are just characters.
Yeah.
But in Star Wars, characters carry ideas with them. They carry themes. So Luke represents compassion. He represents wisdom at the end of Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
And he holds that archetype of that idea with him. So when you go forward, whatever you do to the character, you're also doing to the theme or to the idea. And I think for some people, they felt that way very strongly, which led to a rejection of that film.
Well, I mean, he was everyone's hero, you know. Who knows? I don't know. They were being bold. I don't know. I mean, I want to rewatch them again. You know, I want to be open-minded.
Sure.
You know, and try to look at it differently. But like, it's like that. I mean, I have a picture of him right here looking at me. You know, it's Luke. You know,
it's Luke.
And Mark Hamill, amazing.
And that, I have to admit, him doing the voice for that Vector Prime commercial, it's almost it gives you an alternate moment where you say, well, here's Mark doing Luke, but in this other world. And this is the EU world. Yeah.
He's just so talented, and it's just, he represents, he's iconic. I don't know. I'm at a loss for words, because it's just, his whole journey has been so, like you said, he started off, we talked about it, just a boy. And by the end, he's in tune. He's a master. He's knowledgeable. You know, he's learned.
Yes. And a huge enjoyment for me of reading the EU books, and especially NJO, was seeing Luke lead this sort of new generation to create this thing of Jedi Knights. And every second, this is the same in Bantam and in NJO, Luke doesn't know that what he's doing is the right thing. He's just trying his best. And that, to me, Luke is the perfect encapsulation of what it means to be an adult.
Yeah.
Because he's graduated, but there's no direction that tells him which way to go. He has to figure it out for himself. There might be mistakes, but he accepts that that's part of the journey. And so he takes each step. And in Dark Empire, those fantastic animated versions that use the radio drama, there's a moment where Luke goes, I hope that I've made the right choice, to R2. I mean, in Thrawn trilogy, he's reluctant to train Leia because he doesn't want to recreate the mistakes of the old Jedi.
Yeah.
I mean, you have these moments, and what always I loved is seeing his efforts pay off, and then seeing the next generation. So Jason and Jaina and Anakin, I love these characters. I mean, for me, NJO is their series. We see that next generation of Jedi, the Jedi that were raised by Luke, essentially. We see them come in and what they offer, and particularly Jason, what he brings to the table, which is sort of even beyond what Luke had in mind. And so that I really love all that. That's just great.
Yeah, that sounds great. And that maybe sounds like it should have been that way, right? Like Luke, he trains, the kids take over, the story continues.
Yeah, and that's basically in 2019 when George was interviewed about his treatments. He said essentially that's what he was up to.
That was his, yeah, okay. You know, and another thing about the sequels is we never see them all together.
Yeah, it's mind blowing when you really think about it, isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
when Mark put out that tweet with Photoshop of all of them together, you know, he said that's the reason he joined the project.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
sure.
they spent how much time together and that perfect age group, right? So, and yeah, it's like, it's crazy. I mean, even, you know, the big four, really, none of them were together. It's just
that
crazy.
is one silver lining of Rise of Skywalker is you get to see Finn, Rey, Poe together.
Yeah.
Finally. I mean, it's a together thing that you have these characters together. Half the fun is seeing them react off each other. I mean, that's the fun in Return of the Jedi. Half the fun when they're captured by the Ewoks is seeing Luke try to manage Han. It's just funny.
Oh yeah, it's great. Yeah, I love I love the reaction when he lifts C-3PO up in the chair and then slides, you know, brings him across. Yeah, it's just cool.
You know, Sam Witwer opened my eyes on this. He had a great breakdown of Return of the Jedi. It's worth looking up where he noticed something really neat about that movie, which is that, you know, maybe that Luke seems to have something in mind. Maybe he senses in the Force that these Ewoks are important for the Rebels to win. And he's making sure this goes off peacefully. But once the alliance is set up, Luke is gone. He goes...
Yeah.
And I was going, that's a good point. You know, I mean, Luke is there saying, all right, I gotta do this. I have to shepherd this. Okay, that's done. All right, now I go and take care of Dad.
Yeah, that's great. That's good. Yeah,
it's amazing.
Yeah, you know, and another thing, did you ever see Star Wars Rebels? Have you seen or?
I've seen some of it. Yeah.
Okay, so you know the Maul and Obi-Wan confrontation there. Okay, big scene, right? I remember the first time I saw that. It's like you blink your eyes and it's over.
Yeah.
Really, it is. And then I'm like, I got to rewind this. Okay. You know, rewind, check it out. Okay. And then you mentioned Sam Witwer, and then he talks about that moment, you know, of Obi-Wan going through the motions of like his journey to defeat Maul and what, you know, essentially was what Qui-Gon, you know?
Right. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way. You're right. I mean, I think I have to give hats off to Dave Filoni because he, there is a little segment that you probably have heard it went viral where he talks about the themes in Duel of the Fates, where, you know, why it's titled that, Duel of the Fates. And you have the future of Anakin is in the balance.
Yeah.
And when Qui-Gon is dead, that's decided where Anakin's going to go. And I think that's so interesting because it again ties into that idea of, you know, it's that irresistible idea in fiction, especially Star Wars. What if Qui-Gon had survived? What if?
Oh, I know.
You know,
there's so much speculation, and it gives us something and other fans something to talk about, because you're right. That's what if he didn't, you know, because they say Obi-Wan didn't want to train him. You know, it wasn't the proper way for them to get a Padawan. You know, he was just fulfilling a life debt. But that's what anybody naturally would do. And that's Obi-Wan, why he, like you mentioned, he's just that perfect. He fits the role.
Yeah. And I'm so thankful that dual dynamic was created because Qui-Gon was a later addition to the script by George. It was originally just Obi-Wan. And he later on had added Qui-Gon because he felt that there should be a contrast between Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. That Qui-Gon represented something that gets lost right away. And I do see some of what Qui-Gon represents in Luke and in Jason later on, where they embody an understanding of the Force, which goes beyond just the institutions that they're part of. There is a very key scene to me of that determines the prequels, where we see an Attack of the Clones that Mace Windu, Mace is this character, Shatterpoint covers this. He's loyal to the Republic. He's loyal to that institution. He sees their role as the guardians of civilization of Republic. And you got Yoda, he's thinking of the Jedi Order. And they have this little scene. It is one of those blink and miss. If somebody talks, you just miss it. It's a very short scene. But where Mace says, after they find out about the clone army, he says, something like this couldn't have been done unless we're losing our sense to the Force. We're not sensing things as well as we used to be. We got to tell the Senate. And Yoda goes, but if we tell the Senate, then more people are going to know that they can hit us. And so they decide not to. But I suspect that Palpatine figured this would happen because he knows Yoda. He knows how Yoda reacts. But it's one of those what if things, because you think, what is the right answer to this? I mean, if this is a democratic institution, we think, what would Padme do? What would she want? She's a senator. Does she want the Jedi to just hide what they know from the Senate?
Right.
And the fact of the matter is, Yoda protects the Jedi. Mace wants to protect the Republic. And this, of course, comes up again when Mace tries to execute Palpatine. And then Anakin says, it's not the Jedi way. And then Mace goes, well, for the Republic, he's too dangerous to keep alive.
That's really good, my friend. And then to think about how Anakin was so in turmoil at that moment when Mace had him. Mace had him. That was it. It was done. It was a wrap. And then Anakin you could see he's battling. Just Hayden's. He played. I thought his expressions were well. It's like he's fighting his inner self, but he brings that up, saying this is not the Jedi way. It's crazy to me that he said that, and then eventually, obviously, we'll wax his arm off, and there goes Mace.
And the more you think about all this, the more you come to the irresistible conclusion that Palpatine is one real piece of. Because I mean, if you watch Attack of the Clones, there's that little bit at the start, right at the start, where Palpatine goes, "Well, why don't Padme? We got to protect you. Why don't you go and spend time with Obi-Wan and Anakin?"
Setting it right.
Think about why does Palpatine want that? He knows that Anakin's in love.
Yeah. Well, because he confides in him a lot,
Yeah.
And it's crazy. And Obi-Wan said, you got to watch your friendship there with the, Chancellor.
You'll notice in the prequels, whenever Palpatine wants to have some influence over Anakin, he always separates him from Obi-Wan.
Yeah.
So he knows that Obi-Wan's going to go off, separates him. He goes with Padme. And then in the next film, Palpatine reveals the information about Grievous's location. He suggests that Anakin should be sent, but he knows the council will reject that because it's from him. And so they choose Obi-Wan. That leaves Anakin with Palpatine.
Yeah.
So he's always trying to separate this two, to just keep Obi-Wan away.
It's Palpatine was obviously he's a mastermind. Thrawn reminds me a little bit, how Thrawn, he's very intuitive and can how would I say that? He already kind of presees things happening. I mean, Palpatine to a T pulled that off the whole way.
Yes. And it's great seeing them interact if you've ever read Outbound Flight.
Oh my goodness sakes, yes.
When that book was announced, I remember that. When that book was announced, it was like a dream. Because he said, no way are we actually going to get Outbound Flight. Because it was something that had been hinted at since the very first trilogy.
I love the book.
It's amazing.
It's amazing. It's good. It is good, my friend.
It's one of those ones where you go in with high expectations and it delivers completely.
Yeah. And that's what I like about a lot of these books. Sorry, continue.
Oh, no. I was just going to say, I agree. And I'll tell you something funny. This is not really anything serious, but sometimes coming across these George interviews, I've gone a ways back, and there was one interview I found, I don't know exactly what year, early 70s or early 80s, something like this. And George is talking about how he's like, you can really understand a culture through their art. And you could really, if you the art type of art they do tells you something about the psychology of the people in that culture. And I thought, oh my goodness, I mean, geez, that's just a coincidence. But you got Thrawn's mindset right there.
Yeah, I mean, it just that character is something. And you mentioned Filoni, Dave. I enjoy kind of what he's doing. Him and Jon Favreau. I think they're doing the best they can with what they got. And it always seems to me when you hear Dave talk or little segments that I see of him, he tries to stay as, I don't know, he seems to try to stay as true as he can to being involved with everything so long. He's very passionate, and same with John. I mean, look what John did with some of the Marvel stuff. The Iron Mans are just incredible. I don't know if you're a big fan of the other fandoms, like Marvel, we'll say. But
yeah, I think the first film is fantastic, and I've seen the rest of them. I think I think they're talented people. It's funny to me though, because my introduction to Jon Favreau was in that Daredevil movie where he played Foggy Nelson.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
And I couldn't believe when I heard that he was a director now.
Yeah,
but yeah.
I didn't believe that either, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I mean, because he's kind of he was a goofy, funny actor,
Yeah.
So
I think with the new stuff, I was impressed. Like I said, with that Mandalorian episode, I believe that was directed by Ron Howard's daughter, Bryce Dallas Howard.
Bryce, yeah, she's great.
She's another actress that made the transition to directing. That happened. It's happened in other fandoms. I think then Star Trek Next Generation, virtually every lead actor became a director of those episodes.
Okay.
But I think if you look at just the directing, there's a lot of nice directing of that episode. I'm thinking in particular that starship shot where we get the window shot. I think you see this little kid, maybe a Rhodian child, he's playing with a little
looks out waves.
Yep, I know it's a memorable moment,
Yep,
and that's a very George type of shot to do.
Yes, I was talking with my wife about this. It's like because I got her involved with Star Wars through The Mandalorian, and they do a great job. George always did this as well. Like if there's serious stuff going on or something happened or we're getting to a climatic part, and then all of a sudden they'll hit you with a moment like that.
Yeah,
and it's priceless.
Yeah, George, it's great. Throughout his movies, there are always things like that, even in his non-Star Wars films. And it's great. Firstly, it breaks up the pace a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the other thing is sometimes there's some humor there. And George always had a bit of a funny, dark sense of humor where I always get a real kick out of. It's just kind of needlessly cruel of Jabba. But it's this funny scene in The Phantom Menace where it's just a blink and you miss a moment. He got this little bouncing snack in front of him as he's watching the race. He just flicks it out and you hear it scream all the way down. I was like, what are you doing, George?
Yeah.
This is so funny. But what you do, those little things, they might mean nothing, but they do mean something because they're what you're showing parts of this world. And that gives you a sense. It's kind of like when Anakin and the pilot are approaching Coruscant and Phantom Menace. They're just talking about how it's a city planet. Anakin, he's like, oh, so this controls this. And he's like, wow, you know ships pretty well. I mean, you're just building up this universe, conversations people would have.
Yeah. And it's great.
Yeah.
And like you said, when you rewatch the movies, it's like you pick up on little things.
Yeah.
It's like, the flick of the thing,
One that the internet has helped me with that I never saw myself, but the internet tipped me off is watching Mark when he's Luke. His reactions to Han and Leia's little banter throughout A New Hope is very funny.
Oh,
he's rolling his eyes and he's having all this. It's funny.
Well, you don't get that, they're brother and sister till later on, and he's got a crush on her too, So
yeah, there's that really timeless moment where he's talking with Han. What do you think, a guy like her? And I go, no.
Yeah, he said right away. Didn't skip a beat.
Yeah,
that's great. Oh man,
Mark always loves to make that joke about Mara. Where he says, they said, oh, you have Mara Jade, a wife, girlfriend, she's great. She's smoking on. I said, well, that's great, but they should have, I wish they would have thought of that when I was still doing the role.
Yeah.
It's funny.
Well, right. It's like, I was thinking, it's like they're like, you mentioned radio dramas, okay? The original Star Wars radio dramas are great. Mark Hamill was, he was in them. And Billy D. Williams, we had Anthony Daniels. They're so much fun. Like Mark really was involved. He wanted to do this. He enjoyed it, because
Yes, he did. And he wasn't the only one. Billy D. Williams, I think he did the voices for Jedi Outcast, and he did the voices for the Dark Empire radio drama, which, as I mentioned, it's been done as this amazing fan animation. And that's just fantastic. I mean, I'm always so impressed, not just by the work that official actors do, but the love and the work that fans do with these fan projects. It's absolutely incredible.
Oh, it is in technology, and there's so many creative people out there now. It's insane, very talented. I mean, just like yourself, you're involved with a lot of different things. It's great, and people need to be recognized for this.
Yeah, and I feel similarly, and I appreciate the chance. I think they've inspired me, certainly. I mean, seeing that other fans, basically, it's the approach of saying we can wait for a company to do these things, or
we can,
we could do it ourselves.
Try
and if you think about it, what would someone like George do, or what would someone like these other people? They would go ahead and they would do it themselves. I mean, in the case of the authors, I mean, some of them did. I mean, I think Kathy Tyers, who wrote Truce Bakura and Balance Point NJO, she said that she said that after Timothy Zahn wrote Heir to the Empire, she sent him a letter saying, firstly, she said, "That's Mrs. Skywalker," to Mara Jade. And then the second thing that she said was, that she had written a fan fiction after Return of the Jedi about Luke falling in love with a former Imperial agent. And so this was really very close to what she had also wanted. So, yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, there's just so much, man.
It's amazing.
It is. Yeah. It's incredible. It truly is. And now a lot of books that weren't released are starting to come to light, or little short stories. It's incredible. We got for the first time ever, there's a LegendsCon. A big.
Yes.
I mean, that's incredible. I'll give them a shout out here. Got the bookmark right here.
Oh, a bookmark! My goodness, that's awesome.
There's Revan on this side, and then boom, we'll flip it over, and there's Mara.
I think that's great, and I hope that they have the most success there. I mean, I've been tempted myself of whether to go. I think I'll see if I can, but I hope it's successful because why not? That's really the question. Why not?
Right. I mean, give it a shot. There's fans out there that want to go for sure. If I could travel, I would do it.
And there are Lucasfilm, despite all the negative press that sometimes Lucasfilm gets, they're very tolerant. They tend to be very tolerant of fan films. They tend to be very tolerant of certain things. While they are not tolerant of fan video games, they are very tolerant of the modding community. You can change video games. You can make them whatever you want. So, I mean, as long as you play within the boundaries, they tend to be very supportive and very open and allowing these things to exist. I mean, that's the way that George was. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like you mentioned on your videos, you were, as long as you're like playing in the field, you're playing ball, they'll leave you alone because it's like there's a lot of good quality fan material out there.
Yeah, and I'm blown away at the fan adaptations that are coming. So things like Dark Empire, but also the Thrawn trilogy series, which is being done by Darth Angelus, I think is his name, and it's amazing. It's certainly inspired me on one of the things I'm working on to try to bring some of these things to life.
I'm excited. You're very knowledgeable, sir. I'm going to give you that. You're quick. You're, I'm going to just ask you a couple of fun things here just to, lighten the mood here. But out of Star Wars in general, if you were in it, what type of character would you want to be? Do you want to be a smuggler, a Jedi, X-Wing pilot?
Oh, that's a really tricky one. I think I would want to know about the Force. I think I would have a tendency to want to be a Jedi.
Yeah, I'm with you. 100%. 100%.
I don't think I could resist that one. Let's just hope that I had the good fortune to be able to be one.
Right. Yes, I totally agree. So on that note, then what would your character's name be? I mean, I know you got this name here, but
that's a fantastic question. I don't know. I'd have to think on that, but I think it certainly wouldn't be a Darth.
yeah, right. Yeah,
I have to say, I do find, some of the names like Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, they seem to be Japanese inspired. Those are kind of neat. So maybe I'd do a name like that.
Yes, absolutely. I'm sorry if you can hear any scampering going around. That's my dog, I think. So I don't know if you can hear it or not, but I just wanted to put that out there.
That's okay. My family has a cat, so I understand.
Yep. They can get into some mischief. Let's just put it that way.
It occurred to me some time ago, astromech droids are basically pets in Star Wars.
Yeah.
And the ones we'd love to have,
No, right. Well, it's funny, in the Dark Empire, I was laughing so hard because in part 2 here, when the Emperor releases them beasts, they look like them super jacked up Rancors. R2 kind of kills one essentially because it's hanging on the ship and he zaps its fingers and it falls, and C3PO is like, that thing's going to eat R2. It was just funny. It was just the moment.
Oh yeah. I gotta tell you, R2 still remains, after all these years, one of my favorite characters in Star Wars. I think he's so funny, and he's the hero of the films. He really is.
It's R2.
I always love that. Every one of George's films, R2 saves the day.
He's as iconic as, I would say Vader. You know what I mean? When you think of Star Wars, you obviously think of C-3PO and R2-D2 right away.
Yes. And I'll tell you, one of the funniest things that George ever said, and I think it's just a great statement, is he said, somebody asked him one time, George is usually pretty witty about this. They asked him one time, why is R2 always saving the day in all the Star Wars movies? And George said, well, the movies are actually being told by R2 hundreds of thousands of years in the future. And so he's the hero because he tells the story. And so I always love the idea that maybe C-3PO is always the butt of the joke because R2's telling the story.
Right. That's cool. I like that. That is good. So do you have a favorite character overall?
Of the films or of the expanded universe?
Well, is there two different answers, or in general?
I think there are two different answers. So for me, the films, it's Luke.
Okay.
It could never not be Luke.
Right.
I'm fascinated. I think Anakin's perhaps the most interesting character of the saga. He has so many problems, but I think and the idea of making him a slave is a stroke of genius. And of course, Darth Vader would have been a slave.
Yeah.
But I have to say, Luke. As for he believes in the compassion, power of redemption. I love this idea, and in the New Rebellion, one of my favorite EU novels, he is that character. In terms of the EU, I'm gonna have to say Jason Solo but I have to cut it off. I have to say Jason Solo until the end of New Jedi Order. Okay. He becomes a different character in the following series, but his life up to that, so his birth all the way to NJO, I just love his development. He wasn't one of my favorite characters starting the New Jedi Order series, but by the end, he certainly was. I was amazed at the character growth, and I could relate to this character, but he was also a character that I think had completed a journey which was so unique and so interesting.
Oh man, I can't wait to get there. I can't wait, but I want to take my time and enjoy the ride.
Yeah. Well, it is a ride. It is a ride because it's 19 novels, kind of like Jedi Apprentice. You get to know these characters. You feel like you really know Jason and Jaina and Anakin, like you would know a person.
That's great, and I'm glad authors can do that. And a lot of these authors that wrote in this galaxy tended to accomplish that, in my opinion. So that's
good. I'm thankful to them, and I'm also thankful to George to say, "Go ahead."
Right? Yeah, fill in some pieces and play around. Sure. So, well, you kind of already mentioned some of the works that you got coming out here. You got a couple video projects that you're working on.
Yeah. Yep, that's true.
You can't really talk too much about the one.
Well, I can at least say that one of them, I can confirm that one of them is going to be longer.
Okay.
It's something that I wish Lucasfilm would do, and so since they won't do it, I will. And it is concerning the new Jedi Order.
Oh, well, you're going to intrigue a lot of people then, for sure.
Yeah, the second work, the video will connect to something that will be interactive. So,
wow, that's big. That's cool. Very cool. Do you have any plans of like putting any like sneak peeks out on the channel or anything?
I might.
Okay.
Doing this interview started to kind of get the ball rolling on connecting up what I've been doing on Reddit and doing on the YouTube channel. So I might.
Okay. Perfect.
But yeah, I mean, it is partly when I find time to do it. So yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great. And you do it, like I said, I want to thank you again for everything that you've been doing. You've got a bunch of material that I want to dig into. There's a lot of stuff out there, folks, that this gentleman put out here for us. And I'll link that in the description so you can check out the Reddit. I'm not quick on none of that stuff anymore. I got kids and stuff. So I mean, Reddit and Discord, but I can't believe like this information that's there that you have put together. So it's great. And I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And I do appreciate the chance to be able to share it. I think the subreddit, it has become this thing that has grown. It was like 17,000 when the film started, 15,000 subscribers. Now it's like 300,000. And you can reach so many people. It's just really preserving the history. That a lot of it finding it in archives, finding it in interviews that have been lost essentially. And if they are not found now, they probably will be lost.
Right. Especially with the way things go. And it's great, especially like I said, I'm coming into the expanding universe and reading the material, and I'm interested in like these people ain't going to be around forever, so
it's true. And some of these interviews, some of the interviews I'm getting together for one of the big projects I'm working on is, I mean, some of this stuff you really have to dig beyond the internet. I had to find the very first podcast, Jedi Talk. It was January 1999, I think they started.
Wow.
And I had to, I couldn't find their files online. They had interviewed these authors of the NJO. And so I essentially had to track down, I messaged the guy who had done it. And through sort of a couple of months, I mean, eventually he found this hard drive in his garage of all these. And sort of rescued that. And that's where one of the Young Jedi Knights interviews came from, about the TV show, the audio interview with Kevin and Rebecca. And then the other stuff, one of the things that'll be featured in this project I'm working on is an interview with Kathy Tyers about Balance Point. It is the only audio interview she's ever given about Star Wars.
Wow.
So from 2000.
That's
so that's stuff where you just go.
That's some mind-blowing stuff there. Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, this has been a lot of fun. I'm glad that you came on. I'm glad Mr. Marcel Ryan, turned me on to you. He knows I'm not involved in a lot of other social media material, but it blew my mind when I seen them infographics. They're very catchy, like you said. You got my attention just like that, and
great
information there. So for real, it's like, man, I'd like to have a book like this, to be honest with you. So maybe there's something for future if you.
Yeah, I've toyed with the idea. There's a LegendsCon coming up, and I don't know. I don't know how expensive it is to print magazines, but the idea has crossed my mind.
Yeah, well, for sure, you would sign me up. So let me know.
But yeah, I appreciate you having me on. It's been great.
Yeah. I honestly I could talk with you a lot longer, but some other issues are coming up and. Take care of some business and the dog. She's.
Well, I'll tell you what. Maybe there are things that will be coming, and so I wouldn't be opposed to talking about those things when we come on board.
It's great. Yeah, it'd be a pleasure and an honor. But yeah, there you have it, folks. Xezene, if I pronounce that right. I'll link his channel, The HoloNet. You got to check this out. That documentary is phenomenal, and that Underworld it's so cool. To see that little, I mean, it's great. And also the Reddit with all the contributions he's made and all the digging he's done and everything he's put together. It's just, there's so much information there. You guys are just going to love it. So I'm going to put it down there. Again, I thank you, sir. You're very knowledgeable. This has been so much fun. And everyone watching, thank you. If you like what I'm doing, like, subscribe, share. I appreciate it. And I appreciate everyone's support. And there you have it. Until next time.
Thank you.
See you soon.
See ya.